If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1, Pretty Good at Typing. A sunny afternoon. Kanaz Pokémon Advanced Academy, Pokémon Psychology Consultation Room. Bzzz bzzz bzzz. An annoying sound came from the onyx coffee grinder. With practiced skill, Johan caught the scattered powder using a Geodude powder scoop, then compacted it with a graveler tamper before slotting it into the Blastoise coffee machine. He pressed the manual extraction button. His gaze, however, remained fixed on the paper on his desk. A hypothesis on the relationship between Pokémon personality and performance. There was no deviation from the topic, nor any mistakes in writing or formatting. Tick-tock, tick-tock. As the coffee finished brewing, Johan had also finished quickly browsing the page. He picked up the Seduct-themed mug, now full of coffee. Slowly, he walked over to the window. Golden sunlight streamed through the glass, warming his chest. Dust particles floated in the beams of light. Johan took a small sip of coffee, opened the window, and took a deep breath of the late summer air, now much cooler. Exhaling slowly, he murmured to himself. Before I knew it, it's already been 3 days. His name was Johan. In his previous life, he was a devoted Pokémon enthusiast. 3 days ago, he inexplicably found himself in this world full of Pokémon. At first, he felt confused and lost. Thankfully, the original owner of this body had left him a decent job, a Pokémon psychology instructor. As everyone knows, Pokémon are kind, adorable, and friendly creatures. Except for the occasional 100,000 volt electric shock, spitting flames of a few hundred degrees, eating a meal that weighs a ton or two, or swallowing a trainer dozens of times. Other than that, they're fine. And besides, whenever he thought about the fact that these Pokémon were commanded by determined, mentally sound, courageous, and clever 10-year-olds, he felt a strange sense of relief. Currently, the semester hadn't started yet, so there weren't many students on campus. The playground was empty, with only a few staff members accompanied by mock oaks tending to the grass. Sipping his coffee, Johan strolled back to his desk. Even when school starts, I won't be that busy, he thought to himself, turning on the computer. He logged into the Pokémon League's official website. What filled the screen was a flood of news about Pokémon, with today's top headline being the Dragon Clan produces another prodigy. Ha, an old acquaintance, he muttered. Well, he knew the person, but the person didn't know him. Below was a poster. A young man with short reddish-brown hair and a determined face, wearing a confident smile, was dressed in a deep blue investigator's uniform, with a stylish red cape draped over his shoulders. Beside him stood a roaring Charizard and a fierce Gyarados. The poster also had a small text caption. Dragon Master Lance joins Kanto League Investigation Unit. Specialized in training and battling Dragon-type Pokémon, namely, Charizard, Gyarados. Johan snorted. If any of those Pokémon weren't flying type, I'd believe this news. He sighed softly. The world really isn't peaceful. The role of investigator was the clearest proof of that. In the past few days, Johan had discovered something shocking: the mortality rate for Pokémon trainers wasn't low. After all, while some Pokémon were friendly toward humans, there were always others that harbored significant hostility. Moreover, it wasn't uncommon for a trainer to get injured by an opponent's Pokémon move during a battle. Not everyone had the same near-superhuman resilience as certain famous trainers. Of course, Pokeballs weren't expensive, and even ordinary people had the chance to capture Pokémon. There were many people who loved and owned Pokémon. But there was still a big difference between those people and actual trainers. To become a qualified trainer, you needed knowledge, resources, wealth, and even connections. Still, since he was already here, Johan naturally wanted to give the profession of trainer a try. But with his current circumstances, seems like aiming for a Pokémon doctorate is more realistic. But that was easier said than done. Shaking his head, he glanced over a few more bits of news and then clicked on a channel dedicated to Pokémon professors and researchers. He logged into his account. The homepage displayed his profile and all the papers and research topics he had published. The original body's owner had once been a Pokémon scholar, with aspirations of attaining the highest academic degree in the Pokémon world. But he hadn't made it far before being overwhelmed by the realities of life. Pokémon psychology wasn't exactly a popular research field. Moreover, the original owner's focus was on the potential connection between Pokémon emotions, performance, and their trainer. To put it simply, it was a deep dive into phrases like stand up and hang in there. But as a transmigrator, Johan felt he could use his knowledge to make a few minor adjustments to the original research. For example, exploring the potential connection between Pokémon personality and stat values. Suddenly, the direction of the research became much clearer. He even drafted a hypothesis paper on it and was about to submit it for review. Ding! Just as he was browsing through the original owner's papers, a chat window popped up. He clicked on it. It was from a user named Who Am I? What is the purpose of Pokémon battles? The original owner had set up a small online forum titled Johan's Pokémon Psychology Consultation Room. The idea was to connect with a wider variety of Pokémon to better understand their psychology, using it as a source for research material. However, the original owner wasn't very well known, and online consultations for psychological help didn't seem very reliable, so there weren't many people reaching out. Since its creation, only a handful of people had ever inquired. Johan hadn't expected someone to message him today. Without thinking much, he typed a quick reply, to become stronger. Ding! The reply came faster than expected. He opened it. What's the point of becoming stronger? Hey! Not a typical edgy kid. From the original owner's rare counseling sessions, it was obvious that most inquiries were from middle school-aged kids. A simple answer like to become stronger would ignite their passion. But not this time. Before Johan could respond, another message popped up. What if you're already the strongest? Johan raised an eyebrow. That was quite a bold statement. Who could claim to be the strongest? Even future champions wouldn't dare say that. He glanced at the username, Who am I? Clearly, this person was grappling with serious existential questions, yet they were convinced their Pokémon were the strongest. After thinking for a moment, Johan skillfully typed a response. Sorry, just joking earlier. There's no definitive answer to the meaning of Pokémon battles. Everyone has their own interpretation. Some battle to get stronger, while others simply enjoy the thrill, the joy of victory, and the excitement of the moment. Some seek a deeper connection with their Pokémon through battle. The answer is something you'll have to discover with your Pokémon. This time, the reply wasn't as quick. Perhaps the person was pondering Johan's seemingly cliché response. After a while, another message came through. He seems to enjoy the superiority that strength brings. He? Johan froze for a second. A typo? Because of his experience writing papers, he was particularly sensitive to wording. Then perhaps that's how he enjoys battling. But Pokémon aren't just for fighting. You could try doing non-battle activities together to understand each other better, Johan replied. Activities. For example, sharing a favorite meal, watching a movie together, or cooking a meal together. Cooking. Online psychological consultations didn't allow for much. As a psychology researcher, Johan tried to build a profile from their conversation. The information was limited, and the resulting analysis was contradictory. Arrogant, yet deeply self-doubting. I'll try talking to him. Just as Johan was considering whether the person needed in-person counseling, another message came in. Looking at the words that person on the screen, Johan felt a bit dazed. Wait a minute. The person on the other end isn't a trainer. Before he could fully process his surprise, the other person's avatar went dim. Johan sat there, lips pursed, staring blankly at the screen for a while before finally snapping back to reality. So, was he just chatting with a Pokémon? He glanced at the name of the forum, Johan's Pokémon Psychology Consultation Room. Well, it kind of made sense. After all, the consultation room was for Pokémon, right? But who would have thought that a Pokémon would actually come for a session? Johan opened his mouth. After a long pause, he finally muttered. Pretty good at typing. Chapter 2, Professor Cosmo. Knock, knock, knock. The sound of a door being knocked. Come in. Hearing the voice, Johan was a little surprised but responded nonetheless. With a soft click, a middle-aged man, dressed in light brown archaeologist attire and wearing round glasses, walked in, looking somewhat haggard. Professor Cosmo. Upon seeing the visitor, Johan quickly recalled the man's name from his memories. Professor Cosmo, full name Cosmo Takao, was a researcher specializing in meteorites and rocks. He was also a history professor at Kanaz Pokémon University, with his office right next to Johan's Pokémon psychology consultation room. Like Johan, Professor Cosmo's history class was one of those rarely sought-after courses, and his focus on meteorites and rocks was an even more niche topic than Pokémon psychology. The difference was that Professor Cosmo was a genuine PhD. Johan. Professor Cosmo forced a smile. Could you make me a cup of coffee? Watching Professor Cosmo slowly walk over to the table, pull out a chair, and sit down, especially noting the dark circles under his eyes, Johan asked in surprise, "Don't you dislike coffee?" Despite saying that, Johan still got up to prepare the coffee. "Don't mention it." Professor Cosmo shook his head wearily. "I haven't had a good night's sleep these past 2 days." In no time, Johan skillfully brewed a cup of coffee and placed it in front of him. The rich aroma wafted through the room. "It shows." Johan gestured toward Cosmo's thick dark circles. Professor Cosmo chuckled bitterly, picked up the coffee, hesitated for a moment, then took a big gulp. In the next instant, his entire face scrunched up like a crumpled piece of paper. "Hiss, it's so bitter." Putting the cup down and frowning, he said, "I don't understand how you people can enjoy this stuff." Soon after, his brow relaxed, and he seemed to regain a bit of energy. "It's all about the bitterness waking you up, isn't it? But it does help a little." Johan smiled silently. "Once you get used to it, you'll like it. You can apply to the administration for a coffee machine by then." Professor Cosmo shook his head. "Forget it. I'm rarely in the office anyway, so no need to waste resources." Johan shrugged and changed the topic. "So, what's the new discovery that's kept you up for 2 days?" At the mention of his discovery, Professor Cosmo's spirit lifted. He adjusted his glasses and said, "This time, we did indeed find an interesting rock highly valuable for research. One of my students actually found it. But the lack of sleep isn't because of that." After briefly describing the newly discovered stone, Professor Cosmo's enthusiasm quickly faded, and he slumped again. Scratching his hair, now resembling a bird's nest, he said in frustration, "I don't know what's going on. Ever since I got back, I've been having nightmare after nightmare for the past 2 days. I can't get a good night's sleep at all." "Nightmares?" Johan paused. After glancing over Professor Cosmo, he spoke seriously, "You didn't happen to disturb something you shouldn't have, did you?" "Something I shouldn't have disturbed?" Professor Cosmo's face went pale instantly, and he stammered, You mean, a ghost?" As an archaeologist who often dug into ancient sites, Professor Cosmo had heard many stories about people uncovering ghosts, but he had never encountered one himself. And in the world of Pokémon, ghosts weren't exactly rare. Johan chuckled slightly, "Don't worry, it's more likely that some situation during your exploration caused anxiety or fear, triggering your subconscious to protect itself by manifesting those fears in dreams." He continued to reassure him, "If there really was a ghost, it wouldn't just be showing up in your dreams, would it?" Saying this, Johan stood up and walked toward the corner of the consultation room, where there was an extremely comfortable armchair. It was where he usually took his afternoon naps. He patted the back of the chair. "How about I help you take a good rest?" Professor Cosmo hesitated for a moment but quickly slapped his cheeks, then downed the rest of the coffee in one gulp. "Maybe later. Now that I feel a bit more awake, I need to finish my lesson plans before the semester starts." Hearing this, Johan let him be and lay down on the sofa himself. "Better hurry up, then." His lesson plans were already finished. There weren't that many, after all. Professor Cosmo slapped his cheeks again and, after thanking Johan, strode out of the consultation room. Judging by his posture, it looked like another case of one pen, one person, one night, one miracle. Rain softly tapped against the window, leaving specks of droplets like stars. Ugh! Johan opened his groggy eyes. He realized, without noticing, that he had slept until evening, and the sky had already grown dim. The once sunny afternoon had turned into a grey, misty scene. Raindrops danced in the air, casting a thin veil over the city, adding a touch of mystery. "Johan!" Suddenly, a low, raspy voice echoed faintly. Startled by the weak, eerie voice, Johan jolted awake and shouted, "Who's there?" "It's me, Cosmo." Only then did Johan see the figure standing in the dim light. He exhaled in relief, rubbing the goosebumps on his arms as he slowly stood up. Professor Cosmo, still not off work. Cosmo sighed. I just finished. Even if I go home, I doubt I'll sleep. Since you're still here, I was hoping you could help me out. Now. Johan glanced outside. Not heading home. Got used to it. When Johan stood up, Cosmo immediately laid down on the sofa. After all, he was a bachelor, and to save time for research, he often slept at the university. All right. Johan rubbed his dry eyes, yawned, and pulled up a chair to sit beside him. Professor Cosmo seemed ready, clasping his hands over his chest and closing his eyes. Slowly, take a deep breath, hold it, and exhale. Now, you're relaxed. You're lying on a soft lawn, the warm sunshine. Johan's soothing, gentle voice, rich and calming, felt like a spring breeze brushing across the heart, helping the mind naturally relax. It was hypnosis. With Professor Cosmo's cooperation, it was fairly easy for Johan to lull him into a simple sleep aid hypnosis. In fact, according to the original owner's memories, this wasn't the first time he had helped Professor Cosmo fall asleep. Soon enough, steady breathing came from Professor Cosmo. Rest well. Seeing Cosmo peacefully asleep, Johan stood up and carefully closed the door behind him. Time to clock out. However, what Johan didn't know was that after he left, a faint red glow appeared on Professor Cosmo's chest. Next, tendrils of black smoke swirled and began to gather. A pair of eyes emerged. They stared at the sleeping Professor Cosmo with displeasure. Soon, the look of displeasure gave way to curiosity. Then, the figure turned to gaze at the closed door, curiosity growing stronger in its eyes. Caca! How could that man do it? After a brief moment of hesitation, the creature, like a puff of smoke, effortlessly slipped out through the door to follow Johan. Chapter 3, Remote Login. A warm breeze stirred the black velvet clouds, and fine strands of rain gently slid down the eaves. Small puddles formed in the narrow alleyway, reflecting the grayish-white night sky. A burst of steam, accompanied by a sizzling sound, floated from a small window, adding a touch of warmth and life to the cold night. Johan lived in an old apartment building, not far from the school, just a 10-minute walk. After returning home, he rested briefly and then made himself a simple but tasty dinner. The somewhat worn-out sofa had the advantage of being soft and clean, making it perfect for someone to lazily sink into. With a blanket covering him, he pulled over his old second-hand laptop and started browsing the internet. Though Johan, as a longtime Pokémon enthusiast, was very knowledgeable about Pokémon, he knew very little about the actual Pokémon world. For example, modern Pokeballs were invented in the year 1925 of the League calendar by Professor Nishinomori from Celadon University. 1,000 years ago, a massive meteor struck the Hone region, eventually forming today's Pseudopolis city. It was during that event that humans in the Hone region first encountered the legendary ancient Pokémon, Rayquaza. More recently, several years ago, the Days Icon Holdings Company went bankrupt due to the cancellation of the Neo-Movoli project, leading to the closure of C-Movoli. At the same time, Watson, the person in charge of the Neo-Movoli project, resigned as one of the Elite Four and became the gym leader of Movoli City. Days Icon Holdings, hey. I seem to remember Professor Cosmo's father, Reza Cosmo, was also part of that company, wasn't he? Johan mused. In addition to these tidbits, he learned quite a bit about current policies the League had regarding Pokémon trainers. For instance, how to become a registered League trainer, the benefits involved, and the responsibilities that came with it. He also browsed the benefits of being a researcher, especially those with independent research labs or even doctorate degrees. In summary, the benefits for ordinary researchers were similar to those of average trainers. However, researchers with independent labs or those with PhD degrees enjoyed perks far beyond those of typical trainers. It's really cold tonight. Halfway through his browsing, Johan felt that it was unusually cold. He snuggled deeper into his blanket. At the same time, he suddenly felt a wave of drowsiness wash over him. Yawning deeply, he placed his laptop on the side table and fell asleep without even making it to his bed. Once he was asleep, the atmosphere in the room suddenly became eerie. The white fluorescent light on the ceiling flickered with a buzzing sound. Although there was no wind, the curtains by the window and the potted plants began to sway. Bang! Suddenly, the light went out. All sounds seemed to fall silent. Caca! A strange voice echoed abruptly in the small room, sounding distant and faint. Immediately afterward, countless strands of black mist converged from all directions, forming a ball of dark fog-like substance. Atop this orb were a pair of bulging white eyes, where the whites occupied most of the space, and a wide, grinning mouth filled with sharp fangs gleamed faintly. A sweet, eerie scent lingered in the air. The Pokémon gazed at the sleeping Johan with a sinister smile. If Johan had been awake, he would have instantly recognized this strange creature. It was a ghost-type Pokémon, Gastly. Buzz! A red light flashed in Gastly's eyes, and a strange energy surged from its body, enveloping the peacefully sleeping Johan. On the sofa, Johan's calm sleeping expression gradually shifted as his brows furrowed. This is a dream. For some reason, Johan had a gut feeling that he was dreaming. The sky above was dim and oppressive, the clouds so low they seemed just meters away. The surrounding dilapidated buildings clearly didn't belong to this era, with overgrown weeds and haphazardly stacked stone piles everywhere. But what sent chills down Johan's spine the most was the vast plain in front of the houses, stretching endlessly, dotted with small mountains half the height of a person. Graves. Johan was finally experiencing what it meant to see cemeteries strewn like stars, tombstones stretching like mountain ranges. Hoo! Suddenly, a low, haunting sound echoed from an indeterminate distance, carried by a bone-chilling wind. Johan couldn't help but shiver. It was his first time experiencing such a realistic dream. Pop! Out of nowhere, a mound of earth not far from Johan burst open, and a ghastly white hand shot out. Immediately after, as if triggered by some mechanism, all the mounds of earth around him started shifting. Hands, branches, and even heads began breaking through the soil. They were all ghost-type Pokémon. Duskull, Bayonet, Cofagrigus, Haunter, Sabai. The scene, combined with the environment and atmosphere, was enough to terrify anyone. Caw. From behind a dead tree, Gastly peeked out, watching Johan, whose face remained expressionless, and laughed in glee. This trick had scared Professor Cosmo so much that he hadn't dared to sleep for days. But for Johan, who had fallen asleep without Gastly even using any moves or energy, it felt particularly curious. Gastly licked its lips with its long, crimson tongue, smacking its lips in anticipation. This person's dream and the fear in it should taste quite delicious, right? However, the next moment, Gastly froze. It realized that while Johan's face was still stiff, the initial fear in his eyes had been quickly replaced by contemplation. So many ghost-type Pokémon. Honestly, Johan was indeed startled at first. Despite seeing plenty of ghost types in the games, with many of them even being quite cute, encountering them in real life was an entirely different experience. The bone-chilling cold that pierced his very core made his hair stand on end. But after that initial fright, he quickly calmed down. For one, he could sense that this was a dream. Since it's a dream, what's there to be afraid of? Secondly, seeing so many ghost-type Pokémon, he had a thought pop into his head. Why isn't Giratina here? Giratina? Caw. Gastly heard Johan's mumbling and blinked in confusion. It shook its head violently. It must be a mistake yet, definitely a mistake. Gastly thought maybe the ghost types weren't scary or fierce enough. Caw. Guess it's time to handle this personally. Licking its lips again, Gastly took a deep breath, and its body swelled visibly. Meanwhile, Johan, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, stared at the terrifying ghost-type Pokémon before him. Is this really a dream? It feels so real. Everything in front of him, every smell, touch, and sound was so vivid. If it's a dream, then, let's test something. Johan began recalling something in his mind. At the same time, within the dark clouds above, a massive silhouette began to take shape. The figure was enormous, dragon-like, and grayish-white in color. Golden rings wrapped around its neck and back. 2 ghostly wings extended from its body, with claw-like structures at the tips. 6 thick, clawed legs extended from its body. Caw. Confident, Gastly floated toward Johan, wagging its long tongue and making a deep, eerie noise. However, just as it got in front of Johan, it suddenly looked up. In the next instant, its expression froze. Caw. Gastly. Johan noticed Gastly at this moment, following its gaze upwards. What he saw was a massive creature standing proudly in the clouds. Giratina. Johan blinked in surprise. Can this really manifest? So, it really is a dream. Roar! A deafening roar swept down like a hurricane. The surrounding ghost-type Pokémon scattered like foam, and the enormous Gastly rapidly shrank, the black gas around it seeming to blow away. Caw. Gastly jolted in shock. Crack. Suddenly, the scene in front of Johan shattered like a mirror. The cracks spread out like a web, until it finally shattered completely. In a distant realm, a massive dragon-like Pokémon, who had been stealthily peeking at something through a glass-like portal, suddenly lifted its head. Gra! Its blood-red eyes blinked in confusion. Remote login? It closed its eyes to sense carefully, but it seemed to have been a false alarm. Shaking its head, it resumed its sneaky peeking monitoring. Ugh! Back on the sofa, Johan slowly woke up, rubbing his temples. His head felt a little fuzzy. As his vision cleared, he noticed a stunned-looking Gastly hovering not far from him, its eyes full of terror. Gastly. Perhaps because it heard his voice, Gastly gradually snapped out of its daze. The two stared at each other from barely a meter away. A few seconds later. Caw. Like a startled wildcat, Gastly screeched. It rapidly backed away, as if Johan were the real terrifying ghost. Chapter 4, Have you brushed your teeth? Gastly. Seeing the Gastly and recalling the incredibly vivid dream he just had, Johan slowly put the pieces together. His nightmare was probably caused by this little guy, right? But judging by how Gastly looked now, it seemed scared of him. Johan couldn't help but find the situation amusing. When he first encountered the ghost-type Pokémon in his dream, he had indeed been frightened. But after overcoming the initial shock and having now actually seen such a Pokémon, it wasn't as difficult to accept. Seeing the terrified expression on Gastly's face, it was hard to believe that this Pokémon, usually the one scaring others, was now the one being scared. The two of them, human and Pokémon, stared at each other for a full minute. The whole time, it seemed as if Johan was the real terrifying ghost-type Pokémon, and Gastly was the victim. Gulp. The sound of Gastly swallowing broke the eerie silence in the room. So, was that dream you're doing? Johan suddenly asked. Almost reflexively, Gastly nodded. But then it quickly realized its mistake and began shaking its head like a rattle drum. Seeing Gastly's behavior, Johan already knew the answer. Realizing it couldn't hide the truth, Gastly forced what it thought was a very friendly smile. Caw. Gastly, being a gaseous Pokémon, wasn't confined by things like doors or windows. Normally, Gastly would reside in graveyards or abandoned, dilapidated houses. While Johan's place was old, it wasn't the kind of place that should attract a Gastly. However, as a Pokémon psychology instructor, Johan could clearly understand from Gastly's expressions and reactions one crucial fact. Gastly was afraid of him. Or more accurately, it was afraid of the Giratina it had seen in the dream. But it didn't really matter what exactly Gastly was afraid of. What mattered was that it was scared. As everyone knows, the best way to capture a Pokémon is to weaken it and then use a Pokeball. Additionally, forming a bond or putting the Pokémon into a state of paralysis or fear also provides a good opportunity. And right now, Gastly was in a state of fear and panic, almost like a reflexive response to stress. Johan slowly sat up from the sofa. Under Gastly's watchful gaze, he calmly folded the blanket neatly to one side, smoothed the wrinkles on his clothes, and took a deep breath. His slow, deliberate movements and calm demeanor made Gastly begin to relax as well. Maybe this human isn't so scary after all? Suddenly, Johan raised his hand abruptly. Look! Giratina! Caw. The Gastly, who had just managed to calm down, shuddered in shock and instinctively looked behind itself. At the same time, Johan pulled a red and white Pokeball from some corner and threw it toward Gastly. Buzz! A flash of red light enveloped Gastly, drawing it into the Pokeball. The room seemed to freeze in place, with Johan staring unblinkingly at the ball on the floor. He silently counted as it shook 3 times. Clink! The ball wobbled 3 times and, with a soft locking sound, came to a stop. Hoo! Johan let out a long sigh of relief. A smile flashed across his face but quickly faded into indifference. So this is what it feels like to capture a Pokémon. It wasn't as exhilarating as he had imagined. He stepped forward and picked up the Pokeball. This was a choice he had made after carefully thinking things through during that minute-long stare with Gastly. There were 3 reasons behind his decision. First, while Gastly seemed afraid of him, it would likely soon realize that Johan was just a human and had nothing to be afraid of. At that point, whether Gastly would continue using hypnosis or simply leave was uncertain. Second, if Gastly decided to act again, Johan, having ruled out the possibility of having a super rookie physique, knew that with the strength of an ordinary person, he stood no chance against a Pokémon, especially a ghost type. Lastly, the opportunity was just too good. If ghost-type Pokémon weren't so creepy in real life, he probably wouldn't have hesitated for even a minute. But after thinking it over, if Gastly could evolve into Gengar, it would be quite special. Gastly, hey! Johan pressed the button in the center of the Pokeball, and it opened. Caw. A swirl of black mist gathered from the red light, forming the confused figure of Gastly. Its large white eyes blinked, and its sharp teeth and crimson tongue were still there. Gastly blinked twice, finally realizing what had happened. It stared at Johan with an expression that seemed to say, I thought we were buddies, and you. Caw. A sharp, screeching cry, whether from anger or frustration, echoed through the room. Buzz. Johan, who had been prepared for this, immediately used the Pokeball again. A flash of red light, and Gastly was once again sucked into the ball, silencing its cry. After a while, Johan released it again. Caw. Recalled. Released. Caw. Recalled. Released. After several repetitions, Gastly. Caw. Its voice was much calmer now, even showing a hint of appeasement. Let's talk, okay? There's no need for all this. Seeing that it had finally calmed down, Johan let out a sigh of relief. Turns out the idea that capturing a Pokémon instantly builds a bond is a myth, he thought. He was glad he had taken the initiative. Now that they could communicate, things would be easier. Grumble. Caw. Gastly looked puzzled. What was that noise? Ahem. Johan coughed into his fist. Looking away casually, he asked, hungry? Caw. 10 minutes later. Caw. At the small dining table sat 2 bowls of steaming hot instant noodles. Gastly looked utterly amazed, as if it had never seen such a thing before. It stared at the bowl in front of it, inhaling the enticing aroma, and gulped. I've pretty much run out of groceries, so all I have left are 2 bowls of instant noodles. Johan explained. The mental effort of dealing with Gastly, especially after that dream, had taken a bit of a toll on him. Gastly nodded absent-mindedly, though it wasn't clear if it really understood. It just kept staring at the bowl of noodles, its misty form shifting around, unsure how to proceed. Well, let's dig in. Johan didn't say anything more, picking up his chopsticks and slurping up a mouthful of noodles. Slurp. The sound caught Gastly's attention. It looked at Johan's movements and seemed to understand. A tendril of black mist extended from its body, forming a hand-like shape, which grabbed the chopsticks and reached for the bowl. But it seemed this was Gastly's first time using such a tool, or eating noodles for that matter. After several attempts, it either failed to pick up the noodles or they slipped back into the bowl halfway through. Frustrated and embarrassed, Gastly grew agitated. Watching Gastly's clumsy efforts, Johan couldn't help but chuckle. After swallowing his noodles, he said, "You might want to try a fork." It was only then that Gastly noticed the fork placed beside its bowl. Johan didn't have one. A strange warmth filled its heart. Abandoning the chopsticks, Gastly eagerly grabbed the fork. On the first try, it finally managed to get some noodles. Caw. Gastly's eyes lit up as it tasted the noodles for the first time. Even before it finished swallowing, it was already digging back into the bowl. Seeing Gastly devouring the noodles, Johan chuckled again. He finally introduced himself. "Nice to meet you, Gastly. I'm Johan. The dining table is the perfect place to build friendships." Caw. Gastly let out 2 enthusiastic cries. Though it hadn't yet become particularly close to Johan, at least now it wasn't rejecting him. "By the way." Johan put down his chopsticks and asked, "Gastly, why did you come here?" This was the question that had been bugging him all night. Slurp. Gastly sucked in the last bit of noodles but didn't answer Johan's question. Instead, it licked its lips, staring longingly at the now empty bowl. "I'm full." Johan pushed his half-eaten bowl toward Gastly. Caw. Gastly stared at him blankly. "Didn't you just say you were hungry?" But this was the first time Gastly had tasted something so delicious. And it was also the first time it felt like something warm was flowing through its heart. Johan smiled warmly. "As long as you don't mind." Caw. Caw. Gastly floated over to Johan, and before he could react. Slurp. Its long, crimson tongue gave his cheek a lick. Johan froze. It took him a moment to wipe the drool off his face. Have you brushed your teeth? Chapter 5, When the Sun Shines Bright. So, the reason Professor Cosmo couldn't sleep and kept having nightmares before, was because of you. A dim yellow lamp cast a flickering shadow on the wall. Johan, sitting at his desk, toyed with a jagged, pitch-black stone that was oddly shaped and uneven. Although he didn't know much about stones, let alone fossils, it was clear that this one had some age to it. Most likely, this was the interesting stone Professor Cosmo had mentioned finding. What Cosmo didn't know was that this stone had a Gastly sleeping inside. Caw. Gastly seemed to be in a good mood, nodding its head as it happily floated circles around Johan, occasionally making strange and goofy faces. So, you could be a Pokémon from decades, centuries, or even thousands of years ago. Caw. That long ago? Gastly had no idea. After all, it had been sleeping the whole time. If Cosmo hadn't dug it up, it might still be asleep. As for why it had been sleeping inside the stone and its memories from before that, Gastly had long since forgotten. That explained why it had never eaten instant noodles or why it seemed so curious about everything in the room. Amnesia, hey. In that respect, Johan felt like he could relate a little. Pulling the folded blanket from the sofa, he wrapped it around himself. For some reason, he felt cold. Perhaps it was because there was a ghost-type Pokémon like Gastly in the room. Wait. Johan suddenly had a strange, stiff expression. He slowly raised his hand and wiped his already dried cheek. Does that mean, you haven't brushed your teeth in 1,000 years? Caw. Gastly. Johan. The next moment, a faint purple hue appeared on Johan's face. Caw. Gastly gasped, looking at him in surprise. Johan also noticed that something was wrong. Smacking his lips, he muttered, So. I've been poisoned. Poisonous saliva? Though Gastly was a ghost-type Pokémon, it was also part poison type. Still, Johan hadn't expected that just getting licked would result in poisoning. After all, Gastly doesn't even know that many poison-type moves at its stage. Looks like you've got quite a knack for poison-type moves, Johan said as his lips turned a little pale. Caw. Gastly panicked and began flying in frantic circles around him, looking both anxious and clueless. What do I do? What do I do? Don't panic. To Gastly's surprise, Johan remained remarkably calm. Since it's your poison, you should be able to control it. Try to take it back. Caw. Take it back? How? I don't know how. Is he going to die? He's going to die, isn't he? Die? Though Johan didn't have the superhuman resilience of a seasoned trainer, he could tell that his condition wasn't fatal. He was just feeling unwell. Even if Gastly couldn't control the poison, he could always go to the Pokémon Center for treatment. That's why he remained calm. Think about how it felt when you licked me earlier, Johan said again. Caw. Perhaps it was Johan's calm demeanor, his lack of blame in his eyes or tone, that gradually made Gastly calm down as well. Good, stay calm, and then you can. Slurp. Before Johan could finish his sentence, Gastly's long, red tongue shot out again and licked his face. Well, that's better, I guess. Wiping the saliva off his face, Johan forced a smile, almost as if trying to reassure himself. But soon enough, he noticed that the earlier discomfort had eased quite a bit. His eyes lit up slightly. With Gastly looking at him, full of hopeful yet anxious anticipation, Johan nodded affirmatively. It worked. Caw. Gastly let out a triumphant screech. It then squinted its eyes, smacking its lips and licking its tongue as it slowly approached Johan, giggling, hee. That's enough. Hey, don't wipe your saliva on my clothes, you idiot. A few minutes later, Johan sat shirtless on a small stool on the balcony, scrubbing his shirt in a basin with a resigned expression. Gastly floated beside him, looking as guilty as a child caught misbehaving. Caw. It apologized sincerely, both for losing control earlier and for accidentally poisoning Johan. Johan paused his scrubbing, lifted his soapy hand, and gently patted Gastly's misty body with a smile. It's okay. From now on, we're friends, partners. Friends? Partners? Gastly gazed at him, its large white eyes sparkling like stars. Family, Johan finished. Caw, Gastly whispered, savoring the meaning of those words. Raising a ghastly, hey. Johan thought to himself as he looked at the swirling black mist surrounding Gastly. Actually, it's not so bad. The smile on his face grew wider, and a rare mischievous glint flashed in his eyes as he flicked his fingers. Plop! White bubbles from the soap splattered onto Gastly's face, snapping it out of its thoughts. Caw. With a screech, it lunged toward Johan. Stop! Stop, you're going to slip! Thud! No matter how light Gastly was, it couldn't beat the slickness of the balcony tiles combined with the soapy water. In the end, both trainer and Pokémon ended up crashing to the floor. The basin tipped over, sending white bubbles flying everywhere. Just then, the first rays of morning sunlight pierced the night sky, spreading like ink on paper, painting a scene of joy. The shimmering bubbles reflected vibrant colors, capturing two smiling faces. Yawning and sporting dark circles under his eyes, Johan returned to the Pokémon psychology consultation room at the school, ready to slack off go to work. Professor Cosmo was nowhere to be seen, and the blanket was neatly folded on the side. Taking a nap first thing in the morning wasn't the wisest choice, even though the consultation room rarely had any visitors, and classes hadn't started yet. Still, if someone saw him napping, it wouldn't leave a good impression. Taking a nap around noon, under the excuse of oversleeping during lunch, was a much better option, one he had plenty of experience with. The grinding noise of the onyx coffee grinder echoed as Johan prepared to brew himself a cup of coffee. At that moment, Gastly floated out from under his clothes. Caw. It curiously observed the onyx-shaped coffee grinder. Johan smiled faintly and asked, "Want a cup?" Caw. After a brief hesitation, Gastly nodded enthusiastically. Soon, 2 cups of rich espresso were placed on the desk. Johan opened his laptop, took a small sip, and the bitter taste instantly stimulated his taste buds, with a subtle sweetness following, perking him up. Gastly, however, stared at the black liquid in front of it, hesitant. It sniffed at it, floated around it a few times, but couldn't bring itself to take a sip. It glanced at Johan. Caw. Is this stuff really drinkable? It smells good, but it looks so untrustworthy. Johan didn't respond, merely taking another sip as a demonstration. Seeing this, Gastly finally gathered its courage, stuck out its long tongue, and carefully licked the coffee. It was thinking about the delicious instant noodles from the previous night. But the next second... Caw. Gastly's entire misty body seemed to shiver as if it had been electrocuted. It looked at Johan with utter disbelief. How could you drink something so bitter? Johan laughed, not a fan? Judging by your reaction, it seems you don't like bitter things. Gastly's gaseous body wobbled as it desperately tried to wipe the taste off its tongue. Caw. I don't need this tongue anymore. Amused by its antics, Johan teased, you'll get used to it after a few more tries. Gastly wasn't falling for it this time and shook its head vigorously. It treated the cup of coffee like a mortal enemy, floating far away from it. Johan chuckled, no longer teasing it. He opened a file on his computer and, after creating a simple chart, turned to Gastly, who was finally recovering from its ordeal. Gastly, let's get a sense of your abilities. What moves do you know? To train a Pokémon properly, understanding its current abilities is the first step, which helps in making a more detailed training plan later. Caw. As long as you don't make me drink that coffee, I'll do anything. Gastly's black mist swirled in readiness. Just then, the sound of high heels clicking rhythmically down the hallway reached their ears, getting closer. Johan and Gastly exchanged a glance before he quickly recalled it into the Pokeball. Moments later, there was a knock on the door. Johan, have you seen Professor Cosmo? A tall, beautiful woman with long black hair entered the room. She was Seiko, an instructor from the Pokémon breeding department. No, I haven't, Johan answered truthfully. That's strange. I saw him in the cafeteria earlier, but now he's vanished, Seiko muttered, pouting slightly. What's going on? Johan asked, rubbing his temples. Today's the new students' registration day, right? Cosmo was supposed to help, but now he's disappeared. Every teacher already has their tasks assigned, so where am I supposed to find a replacement? New student registration day? Today? Johan froze. No wonder there were so many cars at the school entrance this morning. Suddenly, he had a bad feeling. Sure enough, when he looked up, Seiko's bright eyes were fixed on him. Johan, could you help out? Chapter 6, Stephen Stone. Johan walked toward the new student registration area, coffee in hand. Though he wasn't particularly eager to be there, he suspected that Professor Cosmo's sudden disappearance had something to do with the missing stone that housed Gastly. Perhaps Professor Cosmo was off looking for it, and since Johan and Gastly were partly responsible, he reluctantly took over his duties. Upon arriving at the registration desk, several teachers were already there, either organizing paperwork or chatting. The most eye-catching was a battle department instructor with a cadabra, who effortlessly sorted through documents while laughing with a nearby female teacher. The cadabra bent its spoon, and with a flash of its eyes, the files floated into neat stacks, though whether they were properly organized was anyone's guess. If cadabra can do this, Gastly should be able to as well someday, Johan thought. Though Gastly was a ghost and poison type, it wasn't out of the realm of possibility for it to learn psychic type moves. After all, ghosts and the paranormal often had a connection to psychic powers. Mr. Johan, are you in charge of welcoming the new students today? Good morning, Mr. Johan. Johan found his seat and exchanged brief pleasantries with the teachers he barely knew. His task was simple: register the students' names and departments, and if they were staying on campus, assign them a dorm room. All the necessary enrollment checks had already been done, so registration was just a formality. Next. Johan called without looking up. By now, a long line of students had formed. Kanaz Pokémon University, one of the top Pokémon academies in the Hoenn region, had a prestigious reputation in the Pokémon world, attracting many students from influential backgrounds. A young man sat down in front of him. Name? Johan asked as he filled out the form. Daigo, Stephen Stone. Daigo. Stephen Stone. Majoring in Pokémon battling and Pokémon breeding, with electives in history, geology, and metal synthesis. As Johan found Stephen's name and department on the form, he paused and discreetly looked up at the young man. His light blue, almost silver hair, a perfectly tailored noble suit, a handsome face, and a charming smile. Johan muttered, Stephen. Stephen Stone. The future champion of the Hoenn region, heir to the Devon Corporation, one of the largest companies in the Pokémon world, and the quintessential rich and talented man. Yes, sir, Stephen responded, his smile warm and humble, with no trace of the arrogance one might expect from the heir of Devon. Johan nodded, registering the information, and handed him his student ID. Since you're not staying in the dorms, no need to assign you a room. Use the ID number on the student portal to access your digital textbooks. Thank you. Stephen took the student ID, thanked Johan, and stepped aside as if waiting for someone. Before Johan could call the next student, a quiet girl with twin buns and pink tights sat down. Are you Mr. Johan? She asked hesitantly, as if unsure. Johan was taken aback. A new student who knew him? Even most senior students wouldn't recognize him, let alone a first year. You know me? Johan asked. It really is you. The girl's face lit up with excitement. Roxanne, do you know this teacher? Stephen asked in surprise, standing nearby. Roxanne? The future Rustboro City gym leader? Johan's gaze shifted between the two of them. Roxanne nodded enthusiastically. Cousin, you don't know? Mr. Johan scored a perfect score in Pokémon theory and ranked first in the Hoenn region to be admitted into Kanto's Silver University. A perfect score in theory? First in Hoenn? Stephen looked at Johan, who didn't seem much older than him, with newfound curiosity. With such outstanding achievements, why was Johan teaching at Kanaz Pokémon Academy? Even though Kanaz was the top academy in Hoenn, Silver University was in a league of its own. Johan cleared his throat and handed Roxanne her student ID. Roxanne, here's your ID. Please take care of it. Thank you, Mr. Johan. Roxanne took the card, hesitated briefly, then asked, Mr. Johan, which department are you a professor in? Pokémon Psychology, Johan replied casually. Neither Roxanne nor Stephen had chosen to take that course. With a long line of students still waiting, the two didn't linger after receiving their IDs and left soon after. Johan completed the registration duties for the day and, feeling exhausted, dragged himself back to his consultation room. Caw. As Johan returned, Gastly cautiously peeked its head out from the ceiling, grinning sheepishly. Johan's mouth twitched. Honestly, having a Pokémon that could phase through walls was actually kind of nice. At the very least, it added a little excitement to his life, right? Caw. It's fine. Click. Johan flipped the switch on the wall, and the room, previously dim, was flooded with the warm light from the incandescent bulb. The eerie atmosphere that Gastly brought to the room faded a bit, though it was still noticeably cooler than the temperature outside. I guess I won't need air conditioning in the summer, Johan thought, rolling his eyes. You can leave the light on from now on, he added. Caw. Gastly responded obediently. All right, let's continue from earlier. Show me what you've got. Having prepared itself, Gastly's black mist began to swirl. The already cool room became even colder. Johan, rubbing his arms to fend off the chill, stared at Gastly, waiting to see what moves it could use. But then, to his surprise, ghostly, transparent text suddenly appeared in front of him. Gastly. Type, Ghost, Poison. Ability, Levitate. Moves, Confuse Ray, Lick, Hypnosis, Mean Look, Spite, Astonish, Curse, Will-O-Wisp. Mood, Happy, Anxious. Condition, Good, though still not fully recovered from long-term slumber. Friendship, 75, Gastly acknowledges you, but you've got a ways to go before true closeness. Is this Gastly's status? Johan's eyes scanned over the strange text while watching Gastly manifest glowing spots within its black mist, forming a small glowing orb Confuse Ray. It really was one of Gastly's moves. Did this mean the text was showing Gastly's actual abilities? Johan's lips twitched. Well, then. Johan couldn't help but marvel. 8 moves in total, quite a lot. But every single one was a control or debuff move. Confuse Ray caused confusion, Hypnosis put enemies to sleep, Mean Look trapped opponents in battle, Spite hindered move usage, Curse sapped the opponent's stamina over time, and Will-O-Wisp inflicted burns. Even Gastly's 2 offensive moves, Lick and Astonish, had added effects of paralysis and flinching. This set of moves could really break an opponent's will, even if they didn't outright lose. As expected of Gastly, a future Jengar in the making, Johan thought. In the games, a Pokémon could only be affected by one status condition at a time. But in reality, that was yet to be seen. One thing Johan was certain of, the success rate of these status effects would depend on the move's proficiency and the Pokémon's strength. Sometimes, it's better to be proficient in fewer moves than to spread too thin. Gastly is a poison type, too, right? Maybe it hasn't fully realized its potential yet, which is why I got poisoned, but it does have untapped talent. Wait a second. The friendship stat was easy to understand. Gastly had agreed to be his Pokémon, so the friendship score wouldn't be low, but it couldn't be too high either, since it was only just captured. The happy mood also made sense, but why was Gastly anxious? Johan frowned. Gastly had seemed off ever since he'd walked into the room. Caw. Noticing Johan's expression, Gastly grew even more nervous, its gaze darting around anxiously. Johan quickly noticed that Gastly kept glancing at his desk. Suspicious, Johan walked over to the desk. As soon as he did, Gastly's nervousness intensified. When Johan reached the desk and looked at his computer. Gastly. Caw. I can explain. Please hear me out. Black smoke was rising from Johan's computer tower. A vein popped on Johan's forehead. Caw. Knock, knock. Just as Gastly was about to plead its case, there was a knock at the door. Rubbing his temples, Johan waved his hand, signaling Gastly to disappear. Gastly quickly vanished into the ceiling with a sigh of relief. Come in, Johan called. The door opened, and a familiar voice greeted him. Sorry to bother you, sir. I'm a first-year student. Do you know where Professor Cosmo is, Mr. Johan? To Johan's surprise, the visitor was none other than Stephen Stone. Chapter 7, Consultation. Stephen. Seeing the person who entered, Johan was a bit surprised but quickly made sense of it. Stephen Stone wasn't just the heir of the Devon Corporation and the future Hone champion, but also a passionate rock enthusiast. His biggest hobby was exploring, studying, and collecting various stones. Considering that Professor Cosmo was an expert in meteors, rocks, and archaeology, it was only natural for him and Steven to have some kind of connection, given that they were both in Kanaz City. I didn't expect your office to be here, Mr. Johan, Steven said politely, though surprised. Johan smiled and gestured toward the sign outside the door that read Pokémon Psychology Consultation Room. Following Johan's gaze, Steven nodded in realization. But Steven hadn't forgotten the purpose of his visit. He quickly asked, Mr. Johan, have you seen Professor Cosmo? He told me yesterday that after the new student registration, we would meet in his office. But I've been waiting for an hour, and he hasn't shown up. Professor Cosmo's office was right next to Johan's consultation room. I haven't seen him all day either, Johan said truthfully, rubbing his chin as he leaned against the desk. All day? Steven was surprised. Actually. Johan began, moving over to the coffee machine. While measuring the coffee beans on a scale, he seemed to remember something and asked, would you like a cup? Steven blinked, then nodded instinctively. Seeing this, Johan smiled slightly. How many shots? Realizing what was happening, Steven hesitated briefly but decided not to fuss. 2, please. Thank you, sir. Johan chuckled. Seems like we have similar tastes. As he smoothly prepared the coffee, Johan continued, the truth is, Professor Cosmo was supposed to handle today's new student reception, but since he couldn't be found, I had to fill in. So. Johan's voice remained calm as the coffee machine gurgled. Cosmo has been missing for a day. Hearing this, Steven furrowed his brows. The professor is usually very punctual. Maybe you should give him a call, Johan suggested, handing Steven a cup of coffee. Thanks, Steven said, accepting the coffee with both hands. He smiled wryly and added, I've already tried, but his phone is still in his office. Caw. From the ceiling, Gastly seemed to realize something. So the sound it heard earlier wasn't from the computer, it came from next door. Seems like something might have happened to him, Johan mused, glancing subtly at the ceiling, now suspecting that Gastly had something to do with his damaged computer. But now wasn't the time to dwell on that. With a serious expression, Johan sat down in his chair. In his memory, Professor Cosmo did get involved in some strange events, but it shouldn't have happened this early. Something happened. Steven's face grew tense. Should we call the police, Mr. Johan? Call the police. Johan shook his head. Cosmo is just missing temporarily. It's not the first time he's suddenly disappeared. He might have found something new and gone off to dig up some rocks. True. Steven sighed helplessly. At Johan's gesture, he took a seat across the desk. Don't worry. Professor Cosmo is a grown man, he won't be in danger. The other teachers know he's missing too, so they might already be looking for him, Johan reassured. This made Steven's eyes light up. Even if calling the police wasn't necessary, sending people to search wasn't off the table. Apologizing to Johan, Steven quickly took out his Pokénav and dialed a number. The call was answered almost immediately. In that instant, Steven's demeanor shifted from the polite and humble student he had been earlier to a young heir of a major corporation with an unmistakable aura of authority. This is Steven. Send someone to find Professor Cosmo. Watching Steven's demeanor change so drastically, Johan was intrigued. Click. After hanging up decisively, Steven noticed Johan's gaze. He smiled apologetically and said, Sorry about that, sir. Steven. Does he have a split personality? Johan wondered, though he waved it off with a casual hand gesture. The room fell into a brief silence. Johan took a sip of his coffee and began browsing through a research paper, while Steven quietly drank his coffee, occasionally glancing at the paper. After a while, perhaps finding the atmosphere a bit awkward, or maybe wanting to start a conversation, Steven finally spoke up. Mr. Johan, could I ask you to take a look at my Pokémon? It's been a bit off lately. Oh. Johan paused, raising his head slightly. You brought it. I did. Let's see. Without hesitation, Steven removed a black and gold luxury ball from his waist. With a flash of red light, a Pokémon appeared in the consultation room. Its body was metallic grey with a brilliant sheen, shaped like a disc, and it had powerful arms ending in large steel claws. Its 2 red eyes and silver spikes on its cheeks and back were distinctive features. It was Metang, the second stage of Hoen's pseudo-legendary Pokémon. And not just any Metang, it was shiny. This would undoubtedly become Steven's signature Pokémon in the future, his shiny Metagross. A shiny Metang. That's quite rare, Johan couldn't help but remark. Metea. Hearing Johan's comment, Metang stiffened slightly, something Johan noticed immediately. But he didn't say anything about it and instead asked, "What's been going on with it?" Steven hesitated briefly before explaining, "I've noticed that recently Metang seems a bit off, like it's distracted. Both Nurse Joy at the Pokémon Center and our family's equipment indicate that Metang is perfectly healthy, with no issues. So I thought maybe..." Metang. Metang moved closer to Steven, earning a comforting smile. Steven naturally placed his hand on Metang's head, showing the strong bond between them. Why can't I see Metang's info? Johan thought, perplexed. Earlier, he could see Gastly's Pokédex data and stats, but now he couldn't see anything for Steven's Metang. Is it because Metang isn't my Pokémon? Or is it something else? Could you have Metang demonstrate a move for me? Johan asked. Steven nodded. Metang, use confusion. Metang. Metang's eyes glowed blue, and the coffee cup on the desk was enveloped in a soft blue light, slowly floating into the air. As Metang used its psychic powers, lines of text began to appear in front of Johan's eyes. Metang. Type, Steel, Psychic. Ability, Clear Body. Moves, Confusion, Metal Claw, Magnet Rise, Takedown, Pursuit, Bullet Punch, Miracle Eye, Zen Headbutt, Scary Face, Psychic, Iron Defense, Thunder Punch, Hone Claws, Ice Punch, Stealth Rock, Heavy Slam. Mood, calm, but feeling down, it might need more confidence. Condition, excellent, great care has kept it in peak condition, maybe it needs a good battle. Friendship, 0, it doesn't know you. So, it's not because Metang isn't my Pokémon. It's just that I can only see this information when a Pokémon is actively using a move. Reading Metang's stats, Johan had an idea. Feeling down? Lacking confidence? He quickly spotted Metang's issue and glanced at it again. A pseudo-legendary Pokémon, and a shiny one at that, lacking confidence? Metang. Sensing Johan's gaze, Metang instinctively averted its eyes. Combining its previous behavior with its current reactions, Johan smiled warmly. Mr. Johan. Noticing Johan's expression, Steven called out cautiously. Johan snapped out of his thoughts, picked up a folder and pen, and asked, "Your family? You don't have just one Metang, do you? Or to be more precise, you probably have a group of them? Was Metang originally one of them?" Steven blinked, then nodded. Yes, we have a small group of them, and Metang was one of them." "Where?" "At the mines outside the city." "Have you taken Metang back there recently?" 3 days ago." As Johan scribbled notes on a piece of paper, Steven's expression grew more serious. Could Metang really have a psychological issue? Unable to suppress his curiosity and concern, Steven glanced at the folder. To his surprise, Johan was seriously sketching a Metang, standing at a fork in the road. The drawing, however, was a little. "Does it look accurate?" Johan asked, noticing Steven's gaze. "A bit abstract," Steven said, struggling to keep a straight face. Johan laughed. "Abstract, hey? You're being too kind. Scribble, scribble." Finally, Johan wrote a line of text under the drawing. "Mild early-stage autism due to isolation from the group because of its shiny coloring." Autism? That was the last thing Steven had expected. But thinking it over, it did make some sense. Other than Steven, almost no one could get close to Metang. And when Steven first caught it as a beldum, it had been somewhat ostracized from the rest of the group. This was a common issue for shiny Pokémon. While game players in Johan's previous world would hunt for shiny Pokémon, in this world, being shiny wasn't necessarily seen as a good thing. Shiny Pokémon were often treated differently, sometimes even facing prejudice or strange looks. If not properly addressed, this could lead to psychological problems over time. Beep beep. Just as Steven was about to ask what to do next, his Pokénav rang. After answering, Steven smiled and quickly told Johan, "Mr. Johan, they found Professor Cosmo." "That fast?" Johan was surprised. "You must have mobilized quite a few people." "No," Steven shook his head, smiling casually. I just bought a few detective agencies. Johan. Classic Steven. Chapter 8, Can't They Go Together? Police Station. Half an hour later, Professor Cosmo sat in Johan's consultation room, looking troubled as he recounted the recent events. As it turned out, Professor Cosmo had slept in the consultation room the previous night, and when he woke up, he remembered that it was the day for new student registration, and he had some responsibilities. Since he hadn't slept properly for 2 days and hadn't changed clothes in a while, he decided to go home to freshen up, thinking he had enough time before heading back, as his home wasn't far from the academy. But when he got home, he found that his house had been broken into. Everything was in a mess. Naturally, his first move was to call the police. Officer Jenny took him to the Kanaz police station for investigation. Because he didn't want his phone to disturb his sleep, he had left it in his office the night before, assuming he would return quickly. But things didn't go as planned, leading to his disappearance for so long. Did you lose anything? Johan asked, handing Professor Cosmo a glass of water. Professor Cosmo took the water and smiled wryly. That's the strange part. After looking around, nothing valuable was stolen, just a few rocks that probably wouldn't interest anyone else. Rocks? Johan was about to respond, but Steven interjected, his reaction a bit more intense. Those rocks? Yes. Professor Cosmo replied. Some of the stones were indeed rare meteorites, but to most people, they were just useless rocks. What kind of thief would go to such lengths for a few rocks? However, Johan had a growing suspicion. Could the thief have been after the stone that once held Gastly? It wasn't impossible. If that were the case, and the thief didn't find the stone with Professor Cosmo, they might come after Johan next. Johan suddenly recalled that, in the original storyline, Professor Cosmo did get involved with both Team Aqua and Team Magma after discovering a meteorite. Could it be? Originally, Johan had intended to tell Professor Cosmo that he had the stone containing Gastly and ask if they could make a trade. But now, it seemed like that conversation would have to wait. At least, until he could figure out the real intentions behind the thief's actions. As long as you're okay, Johan said, offering some comfort. Thank you, Professor Cosmo replied gratefully. Whether it was for letting him sleep well the night before, covering for him during the student registration, or something else, Professor Cosmo seemed genuinely appreciative. Johan shook his head, indicating it wasn't a big deal. Well, I need to stop by the administration office. I saw a lot of missed calls on my phone earlier, Professor Cosmo said with a bitter smile as he stood up. I'll go with you, Johan said, also standing up. Seeing the puzzled expressions on Professor Cosmo and Steven's faces, he explained, my computer's having some issues. I need to see if I can request a new one. You don't need to go through the trouble. Just use mine for now. I hardly ever use it anyway. It might take a while for the new one to arrive, and when it does, we can switch it back, Professor Cosmo suggested. After a brief moment of hesitation, Johan agreed. That works. Professor Cosmo left, and the consultation room was once again quiet, with only Johan and a thoughtful-looking Steven remaining. After a while, Steven seemed to remember something. They hadn't finished discussing Metang's issue. After thinking about how to phrase it, Steven spoke up, Mr. Johan, about Metang. Johan snapped out of his thoughts and smiled. Don't worry. Metang's issue isn't too serious. A little psychological guidance should fix it. Steven sighed in relief. He couldn't help but feel a bit guilty. If he hadn't been so preoccupied with his family's company recently and had paid more attention to Metang, maybe Metang wouldn't have developed this problem. At that moment, Steven's mind drifted to the difficult choice that had been weighing on him for some time. As the heir to the Devon Corporation and a member of the Stone family, Steven knew he had responsibilities to both the company and his family. He couldn't refuse that duty. But as a Pokémon trainer, he also had obligations to his Pokémon and to his own dreams and ambitions. He knew that a person's energy was limited. If Devon had been a small company, or if his goals as a trainer weren't so high, balancing the two might not have been such a problem for him. But Steven. Johan's voice interrupted his thoughts. Looking over, Steven saw Johan place the folder with the doodles on the desk. Metang was depicted at a fork in the road. To help Metang, we can approach it in two ways, psychological counseling or physical intervention. Johan drew two paths on the paper, labeling one as psychological counseling and the other as physical intervention. He then looked up at Steven and asked casually, "Which path do you want to take first?" Without thinking, Steven responded, "Can't they go together?" Johan smiled and drew lines connecting the two paths, merging them into a single wide road. With a meaningful tone, he said, "Exactly. Can't they go together?" As he stared at the now combined paths, Steven felt a jolt. He stiffened and looked at Johan. For some reason, he felt that Johan's words carried a deeper meaning. The feeling intensified when he met Johan's knowing gaze. But Johan had already closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, taking a sip of his coffee. "It's late today. How about we start tomorrow?" Steven hesitated, but then smiled warmly. "All right." After Steven left, Johan added one final note to the paper. "Steven Stone, perfectionist to the extreme. Gastly, what kind of stone do you think this is?" Back in the quiet consultation room, Johan pulled out the mysterious stone again. The more he looked at it, the more convinced he became that the robbery at Professor Cosmo's house was somehow connected to it. Caca. Gastly floated down from the ceiling. Seeing that Johan wasn't upset about the broken computer, Gastly let out a sigh of relief. It then floated over to examine the stone but soon wore a puzzled expression. It had no idea what the stone was either. Maybe it once knew, but by now, it had forgotten why it chose that particular stone to sleep in. Could it be a fossil? Johan guessed, trying to think of a reasonable explanation. If it were the fossil of an anorith or a liliup, it could have significant value. Caca. Gastly hovered around the stone, inspecting it closely, but still couldn't figure it out. Maybe I should return this to Professor Cosmo. Johan mused aloud, looking at Gastly. If the stone really was the cause of all the trouble, returning it to its original owner seemed like a good option. Even though it might be a bit irresponsible, he would at least give Professor Cosmo a heads up. But Gastly vehemently shook its head, pointing at the stone and then at itself, insisting that it was the rightful owner of the stone. Johan chuckled. All right. It does belong to you, after all. Caca. Gastly formed a misty hand and patted Johan's shoulder, as if to say, "You're learning." Johan rolled his eyes but didn't argue. Instead, he focused once more on the stone. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe they've already taken what they wanted. Do you really believe that? Gastly's eyes seemed to ask. Johan decided not to dwell on it too much. After all, he wasn't in control of the situation from the start. Gastly, do you feel unwell at all? Johan asked, recalling that Gastly's Pokédex entry had indicated that it wasn't in peak condition. Caca. Gastly tilted its head in confusion. Unwell? Not at all. Johan frowned. Whether it was Pokémon or humans, the biggest issue was often when they couldn't feel that something was wrong with their own bodies. Though Johan had learned some basic Pokémon medical knowledge as part of his psychology studies, diagnosing hidden issues like this was beyond his expertise. Especially with a ghost-type Pokémon like Gastly, which required a different approach. Should I take it to a Pokémon center? But then Johan remembered how expensive it was for non-registered trainers to get treatment at a Pokémon center, and his head started to ache. Money. It wasn't just the cost of treatment. Raising Gastly would also require a significant amount of money. And there was no real limit to how much could be spent. Johan sighed. Thankfully, he had a stable job. Raising Gastly alone should be manageable, right? Let's pick up where we left off. Gastly had only demonstrated the start of its moves earlier, before they were interrupted. Now, they finally had time to continue. Caca. Gastly floated up, eager to continue. Most of your moves are straightforward enough. But when it comes to hypnosis, I do have some tips. As for Will-O-Wisp, I believe it's more about subtlety than speed, though speed is important too. And with Confuse Ray, you should focus more on speed, since it's harder to conceal. But maybe you can try combining Confuse Ray with Will-O-Wisp. Chapter 9, Watch Your Back. I have changed the Jengar to something else. Previous chapters have also been edited to include the new change. Caca. In the consultation room, Johan sat at his desk, discussing his thoughts and noting Gastly's progress. From his perspective, Gastly didn't seem to have any major issues. Johan had already developed a basic understanding of Gastly's abilities. Overall, Gastly had learned a lot of moves, but its mastery of them was concerning. However, Johan wasn't too worried. He believed he had plenty of time to train and nurture Gastly. As a Pokémon psychology tutor, even when the academy started, he'd still have plenty of free time. A day like today, where he was busy from morning until night, was rare. Of course, while Johan had been a huge Pokémon fan in his previous life, his understanding was limited to the two-dimensional games and images. He only knew the effects and combos of moves, which was quite different from the reality of the Pokémon world. So, not only did Gastly need to learn, but Johan also needed to learn how to train a ghost-type Pokémon. At Johan's apartment, Man and Pokémon were nestled on the sofa, watching a video playing on Johan's old laptop with rapt attention. See? This is how ghost-type Pokémon battle. The screen showed footage from the 34th Silver Academy Championship, featuring a battle between a ghost-type trainer and an ice-type trainer. The ghost-type trainer was using a Haunter, Gastly's evolved form. Gastly blinked, its misty form transforming into a hand, pointing at the frozen Haunter lying on the ground. Caw. But it lost. Ahem, Johan coughed awkwardly, that's only because its opponent was too strong, but its battle strategy wasn't wrong. The victorious Pokémon on screen was a Lapras, and the Ice-type trainer was a tall girl with long, orange-red hair, glasses, and a well-coordinated outfit. Her name was Lorelei, one of the future Elite Four of the Kanto region. Losing to her, Johan thought, was completely normal. In fact, the ghost-type trainer had once been quite famous at Silver Academy. Caw. Oh. Gastly nodded, somewhat understanding. Johan turned off the video, revealing a long list of other ghost Pokémon battle videos he had searched. You keep watching for now, I'll go make dinner. After setting the laptop on the coffee table, Johan donned an apron and headed for the kitchen. Soon, the sound of sizzling food filled the air. Caw. Meanwhile, Gastly floated in front of the laptop, its eyes darting back and forth across the screen. It quickly figured out how to use the mouse and clicked on a video with a high view count. The title? Agatha the Elite Four, I Am Fear. As the video began, Gastly's eyes lit up at the sight of a Jengar. But as it watched, its expression slowly turned blank. Caw. You can fight like that? Gastly was absolutely stunned. When Johan finished cooking and came to call Gastly for dinner, he found it glued to the screen, eyes almost pressing against it. So focused. Johan chuckled as he walked over. At the same time, on the video, a hunched old woman with graying hair, a dark complexion, and a raspy voice spoke ominously. The strength of ghost-type Pokémon lies in their speed and trickery. You must always. Caw. Gastly nodded enthusiastically in agreement. Direct combat is child's play. Always remember, if a ghost-type can attack from behind, don't confront the enemy head-on. If it can stay in the shadows, avoid the light. Caw. Attack from behind? Fight in the dark? It gets it now. Gastly had a sudden realization. Agatha of the Elite Four? Johan raised an eyebrow as he glanced at the video Gastly was watching. And the things she was teaching. Even the brightest day will end in night. Even in light, shadows lurk nearby. Dance in the shadows, and on nights when the cold wind blows, always watch your back. Johan. Why does this sound more and more off? Gastly. Johan called out. Caw. Hearing a voice behind it, Gastly jumped in surprise. It turned around sharply, only to see Johan standing there. Gastly sighed in relief, but its misty form remained unsettled. Caw. That scared the ghost out of me. Suddenly, Gastly froze. Could this be the power of from behind? What's wrong? Johan waved his hand in front of Gastly's face. Caw. Gastly quickly shook its head, pretending nothing had happened. The two sat down at the dinner table. Caw. Gastly sniffed the delicious aroma, looking excited, but also a bit confused. It smelled something else besides the food. I'll buy you some poke blocks tomorrow, Johan said, not noticing Gastly's confusion. Poke blocks? Gastly's eyes lit up in excitement. Earlier, while watching the videos, Gastly had heard a lot about poke blocks. Johan figured that maybe Gastly's condition was due to nutrient deficiency from sleeping for so long. If the poke blocks didn't help, then they'd have to visit the Pokémon Center. Plus, raising Pokémon required the support of poke blocks. While regular food could provide basic sustenance, it wasn't enough for Pokémon to grow strong. Good thing the original Johan saved up some money. It should be enough for a while, Johan thought. Earlier, he had checked his bank account balance 5 figures. A comforting number. Still, I should find some side gigs, he mused. Johan already had some ideas for extra income. Gastly devoured the food happily, as if it hadn't eaten in hundreds of years. After dinner, Johan returned to his desk, searching online for tips on raising ghost-type Pokémon, especially Gastly. For many other trainers, this kind of research might seem tedious, but for Johan, it was an exciting challenge. He skipped over the simple videos and images, diving straight into research forums and poring over lengthy papers. Eventually, he found an old paper. Thoughts on raising ghost-type Pokémon Professor Samuel Oak. That makes sense. Johan hadn't expected the author to be the famous Professor Oak, a leading authority on Pokémon. But given Professor Oak's connection to Agatha, the work of the past benefits the future. Johan smiled as he opened the paper and began noting the important points. Caca. Seeing Johan deeply absorbed in his studies, Gastly's eyes twinkled mischievously. It quietly floated towards the kitchen. Click. Carefully, Gastly flipped a switch. Hiss whoosh. Gastly. By the time Johan finished reading the paper, 2 hours had passed. A faint white light filtered through the velvet clouds outside, casting a soft glow on the desk. Johan stretched, feeling accomplished. Looking around and not seeing Gastly, he called out. Caca. Gastly floated out from the wall, giggling sheepishly. Heek. It suddenly hiccuped and quickly clamped its mouth shut. You seem. Johan eyed Gastly from head to toe. Fatter. As a gaseous Pokémon, Gastly's size wasn't fixed, but Johan could swear it looked bigger than before. Gastly shook its head, avoiding Johan's gaze. Am I? No way. Must be your imagination. Its suspicious behavior didn't escape Johan's notice. But too tired to investigate further, Johan simply asked. Want to watch an intense movie before bed? Caca. Gastly responded excitedly, but as it opened its mouth, a strange smell wafted out. What's that smell? Johan wrinkled his nose. Gas? Realizing what had happened, Gastly quickly inhaled, and the scent faded. Since Gastly was a gaseous being, the smell must have come from it. Johan didn't think too much of it and said, turn off the lights. Click. The room darkened. In the faint glow of the computer screen, man and Pokémon huddled together and started a movie My Secret with Miss Magius. Gastly. The next morning, Johan walked into the kitchen to make breakfast and saw the gas meter had hit 0. A vein bulged on his forehead. Now he knew what Gastly had been up to in the kitchen last night. Caca. I swear, it wasn't me. Gastly blinked innocently with big eyes, trying to look convincing. Chapter 10, Sense of Danger. On his way to work, Johan carried a bag of buns he bought from a convenience store. As he walked, he occasionally tossed a bun toward the wall of a nearby alley. Before the bun could hit the wall, Gastly floated out from it and caught it in its mouth. Caca. Gastly glanced at Johan with a guilty, pitiful expression. Johan knew exactly what was going on, but he was helpless. After all, trickery was part of Gastly's nature. He couldn't suppress a Pokémon's instincts, even if it meant putting up with some mischief. Even Agatha of the Elite Four occasionally had to deal with pranks from her Jengar, though she'd long since learned not to fall for them. Plus, Gastly's mistake with the gas wasn't really a prank, it was simply curious. No more going into the kitchen, Johan scolded the pitiful Gastly with mock seriousness. Caca caca. If Gastly had hands, it would be swearing an oath right now. Seeing that Johan wasn't truly angry, Gastly quickly dropped its act, happily enjoying its snack instead. Johan shook his head, knowing full well that Gastly's display of guilt had been fake all along. After work, we'll pick up some poke blocks, and pay the gas bill too. Caca, caca. Gastly responded but suddenly froze, turning its gaze toward the alley behind them. Noticing Gastly's reaction, Johan also looked back in the same direction. He thought he glimpsed a figure in the distance. Turning to Gastly, he saw it nodding solemnly, confirming his suspicions. This alley was a quiet shortcut to the academy, where you could go weeks without running into anyone. Moreover, it seemed like this person had been following them for a while. Caca. Gastly's expression turned fierce, and it looked ready to chase after the figure, but Johan quickly stopped it. In response to Gastly's confusion, Johan explained with a serious tone. We don't know who they are, what their strength is, or their motives. Rushing in would just expose us. His expression returned to calm as he popped a bun into his mouth and signaled Gastly to return to his side. They proceeded toward the academy at their usual pace. The fact that their stalker kept their distance meant they were cautious. And since the alley was narrow and dim, Gastly likely hadn't been noticed. Now that the pursuer had revealed themselves, Johan figured that as long as he acted as if nothing had happened, the roles would reverse. He'd have the advantage of knowing while they remained unaware. Still, Johan had a good idea of why they were being followed. It was probably related to the stone he had. The situation he had feared the most had finally come to pass. Luckily, the follower had done nothing reckless, merely tailing them from a distance. They arrived at the academy without incident, allowing Johan to relax a bit. But it also made him realize that his previously quiet life might soon become much more complicated. There was one thing he had to clear up first. Upon reaching the academy, Johan didn't return to his consultation room immediately. Instead, he headed to Professor Cosmo's office. Johan. Professor Cosmo, who was sitting at his desk sorting through lesson plans, looked surprised to see Johan. I'm here for the computer tower, Johan said with a smile, getting straight to the point. Professor Cosmo understood and stood up. Right, go ahead and take it. I spoke to the administration, but they said they're busy with the start of the term, so it'll take a few days to get you a new one. Johan rolled up his sleeves and began disconnecting the tower, casually asking, was the theft bad? Professor Cosmo sighed, looking troubled. It depends on how you look at it. They didn't take anything valuable in monetary terms, just some stones that are important to me. Rare finds, I imagine? Like the one you told me about the other day. Johan prompted. Exactly, Professor Cosmo said with a sigh. I barely had a chance to study it. In fact, I can't even remember if I left it at the academy or back home, but either way, it's gone. Did you and Steven find it together? Is it a fossil? Mentioning Steven seemed to brighten Professor Cosmo's mood. Yes, Steven's a remarkable kid, he said fondly. We've known each other for a long time, ever since his father worked at the Moss Deep Space Center. But as for that stone, I'm not sure if it's a fossil. My first impression is that it's more like a meteorite fragment. By then, Johan had removed the tower. Meteorite fragment? Where could you find something like that? At Meteor Falls. Professor Cosmo replied without hesitation. Meteorites aren't as rare as you'd think. Meteor Falls itself was created by a meteorite impact, and Pseudopolis City was formed from the heat of another meteorite. I think I've heard that before. Johan smiled as he thanked Professor Cosmo and carried the tower toward the door. Just as he was about to leave, he turned and asked, by the way, did they find the burglars? Do you know who they were? No, Professor Cosmo shook his head. Officer Jenny and her team are searching, but since only stones were taken, well, you know how it is. Back in his consultation room, the smile faded from Johan's face, replaced by a serious expression. Meteor Falls? From what he remembered, Professor Cosmo attracted the attention of Team Aqua and Team Magma because he found a fossil there. Could the people who broke into Professor Cosmo's house be from Team Aqua or Team Magma? Both of these underground organizations were the biggest in the Hone region, with enormous power and influence, capable of challenging even the Hone League itself. Moreover, their goals were incredibly ambitious. They sought the ancient legendary Pokémon Kyogre and Groudon. But then Johan furrowed his brows. The timeline doesn't match up, he thought. Steven was still a student, far from becoming a champion, and both Team Aqua and Team Magma should still be in hiding. So maybe things haven't escalated that far yet? Caw. Gastly floated in front of Johan, waving its misty form to get his attention. Johan snapped out of his thoughts and said gravely, Gastly, we might need to take the Pokémon League Trainer Certification exam. Caw. Hey? Whether it was Team Aqua, Team Magma, or someone else, having a certified League Trainer status would provide Johan and Gastly with some protection. Team Aqua or Magma wouldn't dare target a registered trainer unless they were ready to provoke the entire league. While his position as an academy tutor provided some deterrence, it clearly wasn't enough. Professor Cosmo's situation proved that. As for becoming a league researcher, Johan had already tried multiple times without success. The trainer certification seemed like a more achievable goal. At the very least, it would give him some self-defense capabilities if things got dangerous. For the first time since arriving in this world, Johan felt a real sense of urgency and danger. It was even the first time the original Johan had ever experienced such a feeling. Yet, for some reason, Johan felt a twinge of excitement. I guess adventure really does run in a man's blood, he mused. After Johan explained the situation, Gastly didn't seem worried. In fact, it looked eager to take on the challenge. It had learned so much yesterday and was raring to put it into practice. Looks like it's not just men who crave adventure. After setting down the computer tower, Johan and Gastly left the consultation room. One benefit of being a Pokémon Academy tutor was unrestricted access to the school's training facilities. Before long, they arrived at the Academy's training area, passing through corridors and across a lawn. Since classes hadn't started yet, the training room was mostly empty. Johan and Gastly entered a private training room. Caw. Gastly buzzed with excitement. What are we going to train on? Sneak attacks? Shadow strikes? Johan's brow furrowed in exasperation. He took a deep breath and said. You're lacking in raw offensive power, but that's okay because we don't need brute strength. What we need is to improve your overall abilities and focus on mastering 1 or 2 key moves. As a longtime Pokémon fan, Johan already had a strategy in mind for training Gastly. Caw. Gastly nodded, still a bit confused. So, what's the plan? Seeing its bewilderment, Johan patiently explained. They'd start with a curse, followed by a combination of sleep, confusion, paralysis, flinching, and burn. By the time the opponent recovered from these status effects, the curse would have drained most of their energy, or they'd already be defeated. Isn't that more practical than sneak attacks? Though, sneak attacks do have their place in the strategy. Johan stroked his chin, thinking how perfect Gastly was for a tactical approach. Caw. Gastly floated back a bit, looking warily at Johan, who now had a dangerous gleam in his eyes. This man is dangerous. Now Gastly understood why Johan didn't need Agatha's videos for strategy tips. Because in terms of danger, Johan was just as formidable. And yet, why was it looking forward to this? Chapter 11, Poke Blocks. In Viridian City, Kanto region, inside a secret underground base. A stern-faced middle-aged man, his eyes sharp, walked step by step toward a chair. Behind him, rows of scientists in white lab coats stood at attention, along with soldiers who stood like statues, hands behind their backs. Normally, these people would look at the man with reverence and admiration. However, today, there was something different, something strange in their gazes. The cause was simple: the middle-aged man was wearing an apron, the kind a housewife might wear, over his black suit. The contrast between the apron and his cold demeanor, as well as the somber surroundings of the base, was jarring. Yet, the man himself seemed entirely unbothered by this. He casually removed the apron, tossing it aside, revealing a fiery red R logo emblazoned on his chest. As he sat down, a soft, lazy purr sounded beside him. Meowth. The Persian that had been lying next to the chair immediately approached the man, rubbing affectionately against him. The man began stroking Persian's head, eliciting a contented purr from the Pokémon. The man's gaze swept across the group of researchers in front of him. His voice was calm and emotionless as he spoke. Report. With just that one word, the room fell silent. The researchers exchanged nervous glances, beads of sweat rolling down their foreheads. The man remained quiet, continuing to pet his Persian. But the silence only intensified the pressure in the room. And the Persian, though seemingly relaxed, gave off a chilling sense of danger. Its cold gaze could freeze anyone in their tracks, ready to pounce if the man so much as gave the signal. Unable to bear the tension, the lead researcher wiped his brow and stepped forward. Boss, its metrics are all normal. In fact, its cognitive functions have become more active, but far more orderly than before. The man's eyes narrowed slightly as he leaned forward. Go on. The lead researcher took a deep breath, then gritted his teeth and continued. In short, the cooking, He stole a nervous glance at the man, someone who could shake the entire Kanto and Johto underworld with a mere stomp of his foot. Truthfully, if someone had told him before that this man would ever try cooking, he wouldn't have believed it, not after witnessing that unusual scene. Greatly stabilized its previously chaotic mental state and emotions. The effect was very beneficial. I see. The man's gaze softened, and he leaned back in his chair. In that case, the newly discovered island will be left to it to handle. Understood. 3 days later at Rustboro Pokémon Academy, in the training room. Take a break, Johan said to Gastly. Caw. Gastly let out a huge sigh of relief, glancing at the floor littered with rubber balls before floating quickly back to Johan's side, putting on a pitiful expression. It circled around him expectantly. From Gastly's perspective, I've been such a good boy. Don't I deserve a little reward? From Johan's perspective, I underestimated Gastly's stamina. I can definitely increase the training load next time. That morning, Gastly had been doing a special dodgeball training. The task was simple: dodge the rubber balls shot from multiple angles by machines. But with several machines firing at unpredictable timings and directions, it was far from easy. By the end of the morning, Gastly was exhausted, but it had performed admirably, especially considering Gastly's natural speed as a ghost-type Pokémon. Johan pulled out 2 sparkling, deep purple poke blocks, emitting a faint, sweet aroma. Gastly's eyes lit up instantly. Caw. Don't jump on me, remember, your gas is toxic. 1 minute later. Caw. Gastly happily devoured the 2 poke blocks, while Johan, whose hair was slightly disheveled, straightened his clothes with a sigh. Gastly flashed a mischievous grin. It had won again. Johan had gotten used to Gastly's tricks and pranks by now. He let out a long breath he'd been holding. Ordinary food is fine for maintaining a Pokémon's basic needs, but when it comes to training and battling, only highly concentrated energy foods like poke blocks can provide sufficient nutrients. That was why, after the first day of training, Johan had immediately spent a hefty amount on poke blocks for Gastly. The poke blocks Gastly was eating were mid-tier ones, specifically designed for ghost types. Each one cost 50 poke coins, not cheap by any means. With his salary, he could manage it. After all, being a tutor at one of the most prestigious Pokémon academies in Hoenn paid well. But the problem was, despite Gastly's small size, its appetite was much bigger than Johan had anticipated. Still, the results spoke for themselves. With the energy boost from the poke blocks, Gastly's training efficiency had noticeably improved. It made Johan realize just how much money a trainer had to invest into their Pokémon. Caw. While chewing on the poke blocks, Gastly noticed Johan staring at his phone, frowning occasionally. Curious, Gastly floated over. The phone screen was filled with dense lines of text, making Gastly's head spin. It much preferred watching videos or looking at pictures. However, as Johan scrolled down, an image finally appeared of more poke blocks. Caw. Already used to Gastly's sudden appearances, Johan didn't look up as he explained. I'm reading up on how to make poke blocks. Back when he was a student, the school had taught this, but since he had majored in Pokémon psychology and didn't have his own Pokémon at the time, he hadn't paid much attention. Now that he had Gastly, and given how expensive poke blocks were, Johan had decided it wouldn't hurt to try making them himself. Gastly's eyes turned into swirls of gratitude, tears welling up as it realized Johan was learning to make poke blocks just for it. Caw. Hey, don't get all emotional again. Johan said as he fixed his clothes and exited the training room. Gastly didn't like staying inside its Pokeball, likely because of the trauma from being captured the first time. Johan didn't mind, though. In fact, having Gastly around was like carrying a portable air conditioner. It wasn't a bad deal. Gastly's training is going well, but training and actual battles are different things. The mindset in combat is harder to control, especially in dangerous situations. It'd be best to find some real battle opportunities for Gastly. Just as Johan stepped outside, the sky had turned a dull grey, as if it might rain at any moment. Before he could take a few more steps, he heard someone call out in surprise. Johan, sir. He turned toward the voice to find none other than Roxanne and Steven. Chapter 12, One More Battle. It's you two, Johan said, smiling as he stopped in his tracks. Steven and Roxanne quickly approached him, greeting him again as teacher. Despite being their teacher, Johan wasn't much older than them, only 2 or 3 years senior, thanks to skipping grades while he was in school. This made them closer in age, and although they respected him as their instructor, their interactions with him were relaxed and natural. Of course, another reason for this ease was that Johan had helped Steven improve the mental well-being of his Metang, which had made a significant impact. Teacher, we were looking for you. We went to your consultation room earlier but couldn't find you. Were you training your Pokémon? Roxanne asked, surprised. As a teacher at a Pokémon Academy, it wasn't unusual for Johan to have his own Pokémon. However, in her mind, Johan had always been known for his theoretical knowledge and hadn't been seen with a Pokémon before. Steven, however, knew more. He had seen Johan's Gastly during the mental therapy sessions with his Metang. Yes, Johan replied with a smile. He didn't hide it and asked, "Did you need something?" Steven then explained the reason for their visit. It turned out that Roxanne had recently captured a new Pokémon, but this particular one had a rather aggressive personality. Pokémon had a wide variety of temperaments. Some were naturally calm, while others were prone to being irritable. Roxanne had initially thought that with time and proper training, her Pokémon's temper would calm down. However, instead of mellowing out, the Pokémon had only grown more unruly and even started disobeying her commands, which left her feeling quite frustrated. After hearing from Steven how Johan had successfully helped his Metang with its psychological issues, Roxanne wondered if her Pokémon's behavior might also stem from a similar problem. After listening, Johan asked, "So your Pokémon doesn't obey you? Did you battle and capture it first?" Roxanne looked a little embarrassed and quietly replied, "It's the offspring of my father's Pokémon." Johan understood now. He glanced around and said, "Let's have a look." "But this isn't the best place. The battlefields behind the training center should work," Steven suggested. Since the sky was overcast, and it seemed like rain could start any moment, the outdoor battlefields, which were usually busy, were practically empty. Only a few people remained, packing up their things as they prepared to leave. The three of them made their way to a corner of the field. At Johan's signal, Roxanne pulled out a Pokeball. A flash of red light revealed her Pokémon. Geodude. A grey, boulder-like Pokémon with strong, muscular arms stood before them. It was a rock and ground type Pokémon Geodude. The Geodude cast a glance at the three of them, crossed its arms, and closed its eyes, exuding an air of disdain. "Geodude, hey!" Johan was a bit surprised. Geodude wasn't exactly rare. You could find several of them by hiking up a rocky mountain. Normally, rock and ground type Pokémon had calm and quiet personalities, especially ones like Geodude and Graveler. Finding one with a fiery temper was unusual. Geodude. It seemed to have heard Johan calling it. It opened its eyes, looking at Johan with even more contempt when it realized he was just an ordinary-looking young man. When it saw Johan eyeing it carefully, the Geodude couldn't hold back its irritation. Geodude. With a sudden leap, it charged straight at Johan. Steven and Roxanne's expressions changed in an instant. Steven reached for his Pokeball, and Roxanne was ready to recall Geodude. But before they could act, a black mist floated out from Johan's side, revealing Gastly's eerie, grinning face. Sensing the cold aura, Geodude didn't flinch. Its eyes narrowed, and it charged at Gastly instead, ready to strike with tackle. But poof! Geodude passed right through Gastly's gaseous form, unable to land a hit. Geodude. It looked confused as it landed back on the ground. Caw-caw. Gastly's laugh still echoed, but this time, it carried a hint of menace. Clearly, Gastly was upset that Geodude had tried to attack Johan. Meanwhile, Steven had already summoned his Metang, ready to intervene if Geodude acted up again. Metang. Seeing Metang, Geodude hesitated, showing a brief flicker of fear before returning to its usual smug expression. All of this didn't escape Johan's notice. "Sorry, teacher. I didn't know it would act like this," Roxanne quickly apologized, preparing to return Geodude to its Pokeball. But Johan raised his hand to stop her. Geodude's sudden attack had surprised him, but with Gastly there, he hadn't been startled. And when Geodude used tackle, Johan had seen a status screen appear before him, detailing Geodude's stats. Geodude. Type: Rock/Ground. Ability: Rock Head. Moves: Tackle, Defense Curl, Mud Sport, Rock Polish, Rollout, Magnitude, Rock Throw, Block, Endure, Mega Punch. Mood: Agitated, Arrogant. Condition: Excellent, it just ate. It's eager to battle. Friendliness: -20, you're too weak to be calling its name. Too weak, hey. Johan couldn't help but frown slightly. He had to admit, Roxanne's Geodude was quite impressive. As the offspring of one of her father's Pokémon, it had inherited powerful moves like Mega Punch. It made sense that the Geodude had developed arrogance, especially after being exposed to stronger Pokémon. It looked down on both Johan and Roxanne, but it seemed wary of Steven's Metang. And because Roxanne hadn't battled to capture it, combined with the gentle treatment it had likely received, Geodude's attitude had only gotten worse. The solution to a Pokémon like this was simple. It just needed some education. Johan decided to handle it himself. And it wasn't because Geodude had insulted him, it was definitely because he wanted to give Gastly more battle experience. This Geodude was a perfect match. Yes, that was it. Teacher, Geodude might. Roxanne began, worried. I'll give it a try. If all goes well, we'll have it sorted today, Johan replied calmly. Really? Roxanne asked, her face lighting up with hope. Even Steven seemed surprised. Sorted today? Johan didn't elaborate. He simply looked at Geodude and said, how about a battle? Geodude. You? Geodude glanced at Johan with disdain. Johan smiled. Without waiting for Geodude's response, he called out. Gastly, give it a greeting. Use mean look. Caw. Gastly's eyes locked onto Geodude's, and with a flash of eerie light, ghostly eyes appeared all around Geodude, staring at it intensely. Geodude shuddered, startled by the chilling gaze. Its irritation boiled over. Geodude! It shouted angrily, charging at Gastly once more, ready to punch. Don't dodge. Use curse, Johan commanded, stepping back a few paces. Normal type attacks couldn't hit ghost types like Gastly, and clearly, Geodude hadn't realized that yet. Gastly laughed darkly, allowing Geodude's punch to pass harmlessly through its misty form. The unsettling laugh echoed in Geodude's mind. Then, a shadow shot from Gastly and entered Geodude's body. As the curse took hold, Gastly's form flickered slightly, becoming less solid. Geodude landed, wide-eyed for a moment. Then it relaxed, realizing it hadn't been harmed yet. Suddenly, Gastly's face appeared right behind it. Caw. Its long, red tongue flicked out, brushing Geodude's back. The slimy sensation sent a shiver down Geodude's spine. Am I poisoned? Geodude felt weaker, its body not responding properly. It seemed luck was on Gastly's side. Its lick had paralyzed Geodude on the first try. After that, things got even easier. Gastly, use Confuse Ray. Now, Hypnosis. And Will-O-Wisp. As Johan calmly gave his commands, standing off to the side, Steven and Roxanne exchanged glances. Roxanne, you didn't upset Mr. Johan, did you? Steven asked quietly. Hearing Johan's calm tone and Gastly's mischievous laughter, Roxanne couldn't help but shiver. And no, I don't think so. But, Geodude may have, kind of, offended him. The battle, or rather, the one-sided education soon ended. Roxanne let out a sigh of relief. Finally, it was over. Or so she thought. Roxanne, do you have a healing spray with you? Johan asked. Why yes, I do, she replied, somewhat confused. She looked at her Geodude, now lying on the ground, covered in status effects, having fainted from the accumulated damage. She figured it did need a good healing. But then Johan added. Good. Heal it up, and we'll battle again. Roxanne. Chapter 13, Poisoned. Hat. Geodude, hat. The exhausted Geodude panted heavily, looking at Johan and his Gastly as if staring at two grinning devils. Devils. That's what they were. It was supposed to be a battle, but from start to finish, Geodude hadn't landed a single hit on Gastly. Its attacks seemed completely useless against Gastly, and though Gastly didn't attack often, each move was far more tormenting than a direct strike. The worst part? Geodude couldn't even run away. Every time the thought of fleeing crossed its mind, it was paralyzed, unable to move. What had it been through? Paralysis, confusion, sleep, flinching, burns. Each time it broke free from one condition, it was immediately hit with another. Its energy drained away from the phantom pain before it even realized what was happening. Was this really a battle? No, this was pure torment. Every time Geodude thought about the battle with Gastly, it shivered in fear. And that eerie laugh from Gastly, always showing up right behind it. And then there was Johan. He looked so weak and frail, as if his only redeeming feature was his good looks. Yet, one phrase he uttered had become seared into Geodude's mind. Heal it up, and we'll battle again. Could any normal being say something like that? Geodude felt like its little rocky heart had been crushed. Compared to this, Steven's Metang seemed gentle, and Roxanne was clearly the best trainer in the world. Seeing Geodude's expression of surrender and defeat, Johan raised a hand to stop Gastly. That's enough. Don't be too cruel, Gastly. Caw. Gastly sighed, floating back reluctantly. Cruel? Me? Johan rubbed his chin, deep in thought, ignoring Gastly's sulky look. To be honest, the outcome of the battle was exactly what he expected. Gastly was simply too strong a counter to Geodude. Roxanne's Geodude had great potential, especially with its inherited move Mega Punch. However, the problem was that Mega Punch is a normal type move. Without moves like Foresight or Odor Sleuth, normal type attacks can't even touch a ghost type like Gastly. And Geodude simply wasn't strong enough to make up for that disadvantage. Not only that, Geodude had tried Tackle twice, another normal type move, also completely ineffective against Gastly. On top of that, Geodude was a rock/ground type Pokémon, but Gastly's ability was Levitate. This ability lets Pokémon like Gastly avoid most ground type moves unless they're affected by something like gravity. In short, Geodude's moveset was heavily limited. Of all the moves Geodude knew, only its rock-type moves could damage Gastly. Moreover, Geodude's main strength was its physical defense, but its speed was lacking. Gastly, on the other hand, excelled in special attack and speed. Complete dominance. As long as Johan and Gastly didn't make a foolish mistake, there was no way for Geodude to win unless it was drastically stronger. That's why Johan decided to handle the battle himself instead of letting Steven and Metang step in. He wanted Gastly's first battle to boost its confidence. Though, looking at Gastly now, it seemed like the confidence boost may have been a bit too much. Still, that was a minor issue. Geodude. Finally, as the battle ended, Roxanne ran into the field to check on her Pokémon, calling out softly. Geo. Geodude, no longer hearing Johan's calm commands or Gastly's eerie laughter, now thought Roxanne's voice sounded like heavenly music. It immediately rushed to her side, pressing against her for comfort. Only after losing something do you realize how precious it is. Roxanne was momentarily stunned. Was this really the same Geodude that used to act so arrogantly? At Johan's signal, Roxanne quickly comforted Geodude. It was clear that after today, Geodude would behave much better. While it might still have some pride, it definitely wouldn't become a stubborn, unyielding Pokémon anymore. Steven and his Metang also walked over, their expressions a mix of surprise and contemplation. On one hand, Steven hadn't expected Roxanne's Geodude to calm down so effectively. On the other hand, he was now seriously reflecting on Johan's battle style and skills. Previously, when Steven learned that Johan had a Pokémon, he had asked if Johan could battle. Johan's answer back then was something like, "Battle? I don't know how to battle." But now, from the precise timing of his moves to the seamless combination and coordination of strategies, Johan's performance didn't look like someone who had no idea how to battle. Especially the way Gastly used those status moves, it was just. Metang rubbed its eyes as if something was stuck in them. Before Steven or Metang could say anything, Johan, while inspecting Geodude's condition, muttered to himself thoughtfully. It seems that in certain cases, physical intervention is simpler and more effective than mental intervention. Metang. Metang's expression froze. It looked at Steven with a pleading gaze. Do I have a physical intervention treatment coming up too? Steven winced. Physical intervention? He suspected that Geodude had suffered more from a psychological blow than anything else. Regardless of the methods, they all had to admit that the results were good. Geodude was now sticking close to Roxanne and showed no signs of its former arrogance. Steven took a deep breath. Johan, is it over now? It's over, Johan nodded. I was thinking, though, if Geodude had been more stubborn, I'd have let Gastly rest and then have you and Metang take over. Steven. Wasn't Geodude stubborn enough? Any normal Pokémon would have been overwhelmed after the first round of Johan's treatment. Geodude had endured 2 rounds. In Steven's mind, Geodude had shown considerable willpower. Its ability may have been rockhead, but that didn't mean it had a hard head in a literal sense. He just hoped Geodude's confidence hadn't been completely shattered. Thank you, teacher. At this moment, Roxanne approached with Geodude by her side, expressing her gratitude. Geo. Even Geodude, no longer filled with contempt, shyly called out from behind Roxanne. Caw. Gastly chuckled, waving its gaseous hand playfully. But that laugh made Geodude shiver once more. Johan crouched down and spoke directly to Geodude, listen to your trainer. You still have a chance to beat Gastly. Geo. Geodude froze, glancing at Roxanne. Roxanne, having been briefed by Johan earlier, nodded seriously. Geo. A spark of determination reignited in Geodude's eyes. Seeing this, Johan smiled. Stephen's eyes also brightened, clearly impressed. It was evident now that his earlier concerns had been unfounded. Caw. I'm pretty amazing, aren't I? Gastly floated, full of pride. Stephen and Roxanne headed off to their classes, while Johan returned to the consultation room with Gastly. Along the way, Gastly seemed especially cheerful. It had just finished its first real battle, and the outcome was clear and easy victory. This battle had reinforced the results of its recent training, giving both Gastly and Johan a sense of accomplishment. Don't get too cocky. Johan smiled, brewing himself a cup of coffee. He had noticed more during the battle than Gastly had. There were strengths and advantages, yes, but there were also plenty of weaknesses. Those weaknesses would become the focus of their future training. After all, real combat was one of the best ways to test the effectiveness of training. If Geodude had listened to its trainer's commands, the battle wouldn't have been so easy. Johan reminded Gastly, wanting to curb any overconfidence. Gastly, however, didn't seem too concerned. Caw. As if I don't have a trainer too. Watching Johan brew coffee so earnestly, a mischievous glint flashed in Gastly's eyes. It let out a soft, sinister chuckle and slowly faded from sight. When Johan turned around after finishing his coffee. Caw. Gastly suddenly popped out, making a goofy face, with its long tongue aimed directly at Johan. Surprise attack! Johan froze, his expression stiffening. He reached up to wipe the saliva from his face but then stopped halfway, his hand freezing mid-air. A faint purple hue crept across his face. This time, I'm really poisoned. Caw. And it wasn't just any poison. Gastly's panicked voice echoed through the consultation room. Chapter 14, Hypnosis in the Alley. In Kanaz City, near the coast, the onset of autumn always brings a cool sea breeze, with rain falling like threads, weaving a fine net that envelopes the city. Raindrops splatter against the ground, bursting into tiny crystalline beads like blossoming flowers. Accompanied by the soft sound of rain, a figure holding an umbrella slowly walked into a narrow alley, illuminated faintly by the surrounding streetlights. The yellowed light outside the alley cast a hazy line between light and shadow. Caw. A cheerful voice came from under the umbrella. Yes, I know. You've mastered the poison-type move Smog, finally tapping into poison-type moves. But let me remind you, who was it that couldn't even control their own poison when they first used it? A poison-type Pokémon that poisons its own trainer. Johan's voice followed, sounding exasperated. He had realized that every time Gastly tried a poison-type move, it was usually directed at him. The first time, it caused mild poisoning, but this time, it was a full-blown case of poison. If he hadn't prepared an antidote in advance after the last incident, relying on Gastly to neutralize the poison might have been a bit unreliable. The cost of antidotes. Johan's heart ached just thinking about it. Still, considering Gastly had mastered Smog, the expense was somewhat bearable. I wonder if this will keep happening. Will I end up like a super rookie, poisoned over and over? Johan thought sarcastically to himself. Caw. Gastly floated in front of him, looking determined, as if saying, if you just hold on for another 30 minutes, I'll definitely be able to cure it. Johan's eye twitched. 30 minutes? This time it's real poison. By then, I'll need a new trainer. Caw, I believe in you, Gastly replied optimistically. I wish I could believe in myself. Johan muttered, his voice gradually fading. Click. A faint, sharp sound suddenly echoed through the alley. Gastly seemed to notice something too, peeking from under the umbrella with a cautious gaze. In the shadows behind them, a fleeting figure darted past. Johan and Gastly exchanged glances and kept walking as though nothing had happened, maintaining their pace. But just as they approached the corner, Johan quickened his step, vanishing into the shadows of the narrow alley in an instant. Hey! The figure in a black raincoat at the other end of the alley seemed surprised. Have I been spotted? His footsteps sped up as he pursued the direction Johan had disappeared in. Click! As the man reached the corner, another sharp noise rang out, as though he had stepped on something. The sound was faint but noticeable in the quiet, rainy night, though easily missed if one's attention was elsewhere. Hello! Before the man could even search for Johan, a voice, devoid of any emotion, called out right beside him. Startled, the man instinctively turned toward the source of the sound. What met him was a terrifyingly grinning ghostly face, with two large, white eyes swirling with eerie, hypnotic rings. Hypnosis. Caw-caw! The sound of Gastly's voice echoed faintly in his ears, growing more distant by the second. The man felt his eyelids grow heavy, his body weakening, as if drained of all strength. Drowsiness overcame him, and all he wanted was to sleep. Soon after, a calm and soothing voice, like a gentle breeze, followed. It felt like the comforting tone of an older brother, lulling him into deeper relaxation. You're tired, you're lying on a soft, comfortable bed, your eyelids are getting heavier, just let go, slowly. Before long, the man stood motionless in the alley, his eyes closed, breathing evenly as if he were fast asleep. Caw-caw! Gastly waved its misty hand in front of the man's face, but the man didn't react. Johan emerged from behind Gastly, his expression serious. However, thanks to Gastly's hypnosis, the process had gone far more smoothly than he had anticipated. Hypnotizing a person typically requires several complicated steps, the most crucial being establishing trust between the hypnotist and the subject. The subject must be fully relaxed, without any defenses. But Gastly's hypnosis helped bypass many of these tedious steps, as an ordinary person has little chance of resisting a Pokémon's power. Who are you? Johan asked softly, his tone calm but serious. Dideki. The man mumbled, his voice faint but audible. Who sent you? Chief. Doc. Doc? Johan thought, narrowing his eyes. The name seemed vaguely familiar. Why are you following me? The man fell silent. Caw-caw. Seeing the man's hesitation, Gastly moved forward, its eyes glowing ominously, but Johan held it back with a glance. What organization are you with? Johan continued to ask. Great Movely. Great Movely? The Great Movely Corporation. Johan's expression shifted as recognition dawned on him. Doc, he remembered now. Doc had once been a prominent engineer for Great Movely Corporation. He had even appeared on television, promoting projects like Sea Movely and the renovation of New Movely. At one time, the Great Movely Corporation had rivaled Devon Corporation, the company owned by Stephen's family. Great Movely's influence had spread across the Hone region, but due to various reasons, the corporation eventually went bankrupt, with most of its assets absorbed by Devon. Later, it was revealed that Doc had not only been an engineer but had also been involved in espionage, sending corporate spies to Devon. Was it your team that broke into Dr. Cosmo home? Johan asked, though inwardly, he felt a wave of relief. He had initially feared that it might be a large criminal organization like Team Aqua or Team Magma, but it turned out to be the remnants of the Great Movely Corporation. Yes. What were you looking for? Our rocks. Rocks? Johan frowned. Shouldn't they have been searching for documents? After all, Dr. Cosmo father, Reza Cosmo, had once worked for Great Movely as well. Johan had gathered the information he needed. Caw-caw. Gastly licked its lips, its eyes flashing red with mischief. Should I finish him off? Johan's face darkened. Does Gastly think Officer Jenny does nothing? Besides, getting rid of the man would only complicate things further. Now that he knew their target and intentions, things would be easier to handle. Ignoring Gastly's suggestion, Johan calmly said, You found Johan, searched his house, but you didn't find what you were looking for. Repeat that 3 times. I found Johan, confirmed, nothing. The man mumbled repeatedly. As the man spoke, Johan crouched down, picking up the shattered pieces of plastic scattered on the ground. He had placed those there earlier. Knowing that someone was following him, there was no way he wouldn't be cautious. The sharp noise from earlier had also been part of his plan. In an alley this dim and narrow, people rarely notice what's on the ground, but it served as a useful alert for him. As for why he hadn't taken the main road, it was because there was no true main road between the school and his home. He felt more comfortable navigating these narrow, cluttered alleys. Here, the terrain was more familiar to him than anyone else, and these cramped spaces also gave Gastly an advantage. Let's go. After finishing up, Johan left quickly with his umbrella. Caw. Gastly hurried after him. But after Johan had disappeared into the depths of the alley, Gastly reappeared from the wall, glancing at the sleeping Daki with a sinister grin. You're not getting off that easily. Caw. Enjoy 3 sleepless nights filled with nightmares. After who knows how long, the man suddenly jolted awake. His eyes were bloodshot, his body trembling slightly, his lips pale. How did I end up here? The terror in his eyes lingered, but his mind slowly began to clear. Right, the teacher from Kanaz Pokémon Academy. As the thought surfaced, another realization hit him. We didn't find it on him. I need to tell Doc right away. The only one left is Devon's heir. Chapter 15, The Greedy Gastly. Splash! Johan shook the rain off his umbrella and quickly stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. Phew! He let out a long sigh of relief and glanced over at Gastly. Caw. Noticing Johan's gaze, Gastly stiffened slightly, then shifted its eyes away nonchalantly. If it could whistle, it probably would have done so by now. Did he notice? Maybe not. Gastly was still worried that Johan might have found out it had snuck back to give that guy from Greater Movely Holdings some extra nightmares. But Johan's voice soon interrupted its thoughts. Gastly, well done. In truth, Johan had seen Gastly sneak back, but since it wasn't anything too serious, he didn't mind. Caw. Not too bad. It was the first time Johan had seen this little troublemaker look so embarrassed. With a smile, he said, I'm going to change into dry clothes, before heading off to his room. Though the rain hadn't been heavy, thanks to the encounter with Daki from Greater Movely Holdings, his clothes had gotten pretty soaked. Caw. Seeing that Johan wasn't mad, Gastly let out a sigh of relief. Before long, Johan returned, now wearing dry clothes and tying on an apron as he headed into the kitchen. In just a short while, 2 steaming bowls of noodle soup were placed on the table. Caw. Gastly's eyes lit up as it saw the simple yet aromatic noodle soup. It eagerly floated over to the table, calling out excitedly while waiting for Johan to sit down. Sigh. Even though it now had energy cubes to eat, Gastly still loved the food Johan made. Plus, with Johan's current financial situation, he couldn't afford to let Gastly treat energy cubes like daily meals. Regular food was still part of its diet. Since we got caught in the rain, drink some hot soup to warm up. As soon as Johan sat down, Gastly wasted no time, grabbing a fork and shoveling noodles into its mouth. Caw. But after taking a bite, Gastly immediately realized something was off. It's spicy. It panted, mouth open, looking at Johan as if to ask, did you mistake chili for salt? Johan, unfazed, replied, I added ginger. I told you, it's to warm up, so you don't catch a cold. Caw. Gastly's eyes widened like saucers. A ghost catching a cold? Seriously? But Johan wouldn't back down. You may be a ghost-type Pokémon, but you're still a Pokémon, not a real ghost. Any Pokémon can get sick. Now finish it, and don't waste the soup. Caw. Gastly groaned, dragging out the sound in defeat. Gulp. Despite the spice, the taste was actually pretty good, so Gastly quickly polished off the noodles and soup. Afterward, whether it was the ginger or something else, it felt a comforting warmth in its core. Caw. Gastly. After dinner, Johan and Gastly relaxed on the sofa. Johan held the rough stone Gastly had once slept in, examining it, while Gastly was glued to the computer screen, watching a Pokémon battle with eager eyes, licking its tongue in anticipation. So, what's the secret behind this stone that's got the remnants of Greater Movely Holdings so fixated? And how did they even know Professor Cosmo found it? While the immediate danger had passed, Johan still couldn't relax until he figured out the mystery of the stone. Besides, his curiosity was now piqued. A fossil. That was his initial guess. But why would an energy company like Greater Movely Holdings care about a fossil? You know what, maybe I should just crack it open. After mulling it over for a while, Johan, who knew next to nothing about rocks, came to a decision. If it was a fossil, breaking it might lower its value but wouldn't ruin its essential qualities. If it wasn't a fossil, well, then who knows? Caw. Gastly had been half-heartedly agreeing, but suddenly its tone jumped an octave. It stared at Johan in shock. Crack what? The stone. Caw 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 caw. Gastly's head shook back and forth like a bobblehead. No, no, no. Johan didn't argue. He raised 3 fingers. 3 energy cubes. Caw caw. Gastly hesitated, but after a brief pause, shook its head even more vigorously. Nope, still not enough. To Johan, this might just be a valuable rock, but to Gastly, it was the place where it had slept for nearly 1,000 years. It wasn't just a rock, it was its bed, its home. Its only possession, really. More money. Seeing Gastly's refusal, Johan furrowed his brow slightly. He raised 2 more fingers. 5 cubes. That's my final offer. Gulp. Gastly swallowed hard. Its eyes darted toward the kitchen, where a new idea formed. Caw caw. It pointed toward the kitchen and called out. And you have to take me in there too. Johan's face darkened, and he let out a deep breath. 1 minute. That's the max. Or the deal's off. Caw caw. Deal. Gastly. Satisfied with the terms, Gastly grinned mischievously and waved its misty arm, signaling Johan to go ahead and crack it open. Soon, Johan and Gastly were on the balcony. Johan placed the stone on the ground, holding it steady with one hand while lightly tapping it with a hammer. Talk talk, talk talk. However, the stone was tougher than expected. It barely moved under the hammer's strikes. Caw caw. Come on. Use your strength. Didn't you eat? Johan shot Gastly a look and swung the hammer harder. Bang. Crack. This time, the stone emitted a sharp cracking sound, with small fragments breaking off and a web of fine cracks forming across the surface. Johan quickly picked it up, while Gastly eagerly floated over to inspect the crack. The once solid stone now had a noticeable split in the center, revealing something within. Caw caw. There's something inside? Gastly was shocked. It had lived in the stone for years and never noticed. They hurried back to the desk. Johan turned on the desk lamp, casting a bright light onto the stone's contents. A faint glow reflected from within the stone. Through the crack, Johan and Gastly could make out a small, transparent sphere, almost like a glass marble. Inside the sphere was something red and purple, twisted like a leaf or a spiral. This is... Johan's eyes widened in surprise, recognition dawning on his face. Caw caw. Gastly had a similar look, though it also felt an inexplicable pull toward the object, as if it held some strange allure for it. It looked to Johan, hoping he would know what this was. Tisk tisk tisk. Johan, to confirm his suspicions, gently brushed away the remaining layers of rock. Soon, the mysterious sphere was fully revealed. The transparent orb glowed softly with red light and a faint purple hue. Johan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. It really is a megastone. Chapter 16, Energy. Caw caw. Gastly circled around the megastone in Johan's hand, curiosity all over its face. A megastone? What was that? If I'm not mistaken, this should be your megastone, Johan muttered softly as he ran his fingers over the smooth surface of the orb. Caw caw. Mine? Gastly blinked in confusion. So, what is this thing? It's a megastone, Johan smiled, seeing Gastly's bewildered expression, and began to explain. As most people know, most Pokémon, aside from a few exceptions, can evolve once or twice. Take Gastly, for example. It evolves into Haunter after its first evolution, and then into Gengar after its second. Gengar is its final evolutionary form. After that, no matter how much its strength or level increases, its appearance won't change much. However, if a Gengar holds a Gengarite, a megastone specifically for Gengar, and the trainer possesses a keystone and has a strong enough bond with their Gengar, it can undergo a process known as Mega Evolution, transforming into Mega Gengar. That's the power of a megastone. Caw caw. Mega Gengar? Gastly swallowed hard, its eyes gleaming with excitement. Even the name sounds super strong. Mega, how cool is that? First, you'll need to evolve into Gengar, Johan interrupted Gastly's daydreaming with a bucket of cold water. Caw caw. But Gastly wasn't discouraged, it nodded with serious determination. It looked like it was ready to train hard. Seeing this, Johan chuckled, surprised that the megastone could have such a motivational effect. During regular training, while Gastly didn't exactly slack off, it did have a mischievous and cunning nature. If Johan wasn't keeping a close eye on it, Gastly would always find ways to laze around. Johan had never really figured out how to deal with that. But now, with the temptation of the Megastone and the allure of Mega Jengar, Gastly might finally start taking its training more seriously. However, while Gastly was daydreaming about its future, Johan's thoughts went a bit deeper. Why had the Megastone ended up in Professor Cosmo's hands? And why was Greater Movely Holdings so eager to get their hands on it? There are two theories about how Megastones came to be. The first is that some special stones, like fire stones or water stones, were exposed to the energy of the ultimate weapon, a device powered by Xerneas and Eventful, roughly 3,000 years ago. This caused many megastones to scatter across the Kalos region. The second theory is that a massive meteorite struck the Hone region over 1,000 years ago, creating the modern-day Pseudopolis city. Encased within the meteorite was a giant keystone, and the megastones and keystones scattered throughout Hone are fragments of that meteor. So, finding a megastone in Hone isn't all that surprising. But the problem remains, why would an energy company like Greater Movely Holdings be after a megastone? And how did they even know Professor Cosmo had one? Unless Johan figures out the answers to these two questions, even though he'd fended off Daki, as long as he held onto this Gengarite, he was likely to be targeted again. Wait a minute. Johan pulled out his computer. He started digging into the histories of Devon Corporation and Greater Movely Holdings. Before long, thanks to his understanding of the Pokémon world, he found a crucial connection: energy. Also known as living energy, this was an idea proposed by the grandfather of the current Devon Corporation president. It was inspired by the ultimate weapon from 3,000 years ago and had taken generations of work to perfect. Devon Corporation, originally a manufacturing company, developed the technology to convert life energy into energy. Combined with some internal issues at Greater Movely Holdings, this led to the energy company's eventual bankruptcy. This same energy also helped Devon Corporation become the giant it is today, rivaling even the Silphco in Kanto. Given the origins of megastones, which trace back to the ultimate weapon, it's likely that they too are a form of living energy or energy. That would explain why Greater Movely Holdings is so keen on acquiring megastones thereafter energy. With this theory, many things start to make sense. After reading up on this information, Johan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin in thought. Now that he had a better understanding of the situation, he had a few ideas on how to deal with this problem once and for all, but he'd need to plan carefully. Fortunately, after dealing with Daki, the remnants of Greater Movely Holdings likely wouldn't come after him again anytime soon. That gave him some breathing room. Gastly, let's continue working on your hypnosis technique, Johan called out. Caw. To his surprise, Gastly's voice came from the kitchen. Accompanied by the smell of gas, a slightly puffier-looking Gastly floated over to him, grinning sheepishly. It was only 3 seconds, just 3 seconds over. The two stared at each other for a few moments. Hiccup. Johan. The next day, dressed in a more formal outfit, Johan stepped out of the house with Gastly in tow. Today, he had a Pokémon psychology class to teach. With autumn setting in, the weather in Rustboro City had cooled significantly, especially after the rainstorm the day before, which had brought a welcome relief from the lingering heat. Even wearing a shirt, vest, and fitted blazer, Johan didn't feel too warm. Since his class was second period, Johan spent some time relaxing in his office before it began. While he prepared coffee and reviewed his lesson plans, Gastly watched videos on the computer. Lately, Gastly had been glued to Johan's laptop, watching videos, and surprisingly, it had picked up a few useful tricks from them. When the bell rang to signal the end of first period, Johan packed up and headed to the classroom with Gastly. Pokémon psychology was a rather niche elective, which was evident from the fact that even though classes had been in session for days, this was Johan's first lecture. As a result, he didn't need a large lecture hall but instead taught in a small, tucked-away classroom on the second floor. However, just as Johan reached the bottom of the stairs, he ran into a tall, black-haired female teacher. Heading to class, Mr. Johan. The woman, dressed in a light blue dress, greeted him warmly, though her smile seemed a little distant. Yes, I didn't expect you to remember me, Ms. Shelley, Johan replied. You're too modest, Mr. Johan. We weren't seated too far apart during the last faculty meeting. But I'll let you get to your class. We can catch up later. Sure. As Johan walked past Shelley, he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine, a coldness that seemed to pierce his very bones. Shelley, from Team Aqua. She was one of Team Aqua's top admins. If Johan hadn't run into her today, he might not have remembered that among the hundreds of teachers at Rustboro Pokémon Academy, there was someone like her. He took a deep breath and continued up the stairs, not breaking his pace. Right now, Team Aqua was still lying low, and Steven hadn't become the champion yet. There was still some time before the infamous sea and land conflict between Team Aqua and Team Magma would erupt. For now, Shelley was just a regular teacher of marine airflow science. As long as Johan didn't provoke her, there wouldn't be any problems. He wasn't even sure if Shelley had already taken up her role as a Team Aqua admin. On the surface, they were both just small, insignificant teachers at this prestigious academy, a status that was impressive to ordinary people, but barely registered to the truly powerful Pokémon trainers. That cold, distant smile? Great. The further away she stayed, the better. In fact, he hoped he'd never see her again. Caw. Gastly peeked out from behind Johan's coat, narrowing its eyes as it watched Shelley walk away. Who does she think she's looking down on? It licked its lips mischievously. Chapter 17, A Completely Ordinary Class. Johan had thought running into Shelley would be the only surprise of the day, but that notion was quickly proven wrong. Good morning, Professor Johan. When he arrived outside the classroom, he was greeted by Steven, Roxanne, and another red-haired girl, all standing there with books in hand, waiting for him. You guys? Johan asked, a bit taken aback. As far as he could recall, neither Steven nor Roxanne had enrolled in his Pokémon psychology elective. Professor, we realized that we don't know enough about our Pokémon, so we added your elective, Steven explained with a smile. Added? Johan raised an eyebrow, looking at them. Did Rustboro Pokémon Academy even allow students to add electives after registration? He shook his head clearly, the world of the rich was beyond his understanding. His eyes then settled on the tall, red-haired girl with a bright smile and athletic figure. And you are? He asked. Hello, Professor Johan, I'm Flannery, from Lavaridge Town, she introduced herself with a sunny smile before Roxanne could. Flannery from Lavaridge Town. Wasn't she the future gym leader of Lavaridge? The fiery redhead known for her passionate nature? Yet another person with a significant background. If Johan remembered correctly, Flannery's grandfather was one of Hoen's former Elite Four members. Nice to meet you, Johan replied with a polite nod, but inwardly, he couldn't help but groan. One future champion, currently the heir to Devon Corporation. One future gym leader from Hoen's biggest city. And one former Elite Four's granddaughter, also a future gym leader. What a completely ordinary elective this is turning out to be. The group didn't linger long outside the classroom. After a quick exchange of pleasantries, they filed in just as the bell signaling the start of class rang. Standing at the podium, Johan surveyed the classroom. Aside from the unexpected presence of Steven, Roxanne, and Flannery, everything seemed relatively normal. Though the classroom wasn't very large, it could seat 40 to 50 students. Even with the addition of the three newcomers, barely half the seats were filled. In fact, besides Steven, Roxanne, and Flannery, the majority of the students sat in the back, leaving the middle of the room awkwardly empty, as if a metaphorical gulf divided the classroom. For most students, Pokémon psychology was simply an easy elective, a niche subject where getting credits wasn't too challenging. As long as they attended and didn't cut class, their grades would benefit from participation marks, making it easier to pass. In reality, past Pokémon psychology courses had been treated as such. The academy didn't place much emphasis on the subject, leaving most decisions to the individual instructor. This was partly why Johan, despite being from Hoenn, had chosen to attend Silver Soul University in Johto. He began the class with a brief introduction, picking up the textbook to start his lesson in a standard, step-by-step manner. Although the course was called Pokémon Psychology, at its core, it was still psychology, a subject dense with theory and rote memorization. The material could get incredibly dull, so much so that even the students seated in the front, like Steven, Roxanne, and Flannery, began to furrow their brows after just a short while. Especially Flannery, the normally fiery and energetic girl, was stifling yawns, her earlier enthusiasm nowhere to be found. To be honest, Johan had suffered through the same dry, repetitive material during his own studies. Memorizing every single theory word for word was merely the key to unlocking the door of psychology. Without thoroughly understanding the content, it was as good as learning nothing at all. But, being the first class of the semester, the students were still relatively disciplined. No one openly dozed off at their desks just yet. For the few students who were clearly struggling to stay awake, with their eyelids drooping, Johan decided to help them out. Suddenly, a tall, lanky boy sitting in the far corner of the room shot to his feet. His forehead glistened with sweat, and his pupils were dilated as he panted heavily, as if he had just woken from a nightmare. "Is there something you'd like to ask?" Johan asked with a calm smile, showing no surprise at the boy's reaction. "And no, sorry, Professor," the boy stammered, hastily sitting back down and wiping the sweat from his brow. His reaction drew curious looks from the nearby students, who whispered among themselves. After some low murmurs, it was revealed that the boy had nearly fallen asleep, only to have a terrifyingly vivid nightmare the moment his eyes closed, jolting him awake. This didn't happen just to that boy, it affected 2 other students as well. So, unexpectedly, Johan's first Pokémon psychology lecture went remarkably smoothly. No one dared fall asleep, which, for a psychology professor, was already a success. When the bell rang to mark the end of class, Johan snapped his book shut, announced, "Class dismissed," and promptly walked out of the room without a backward glance. Punctual to the second. As for staying afterward to answer questions, not a chance. This was university. If students wanted to learn, they needed to take the initiative. Knowledge wouldn't just walk into their heads on its own. For most of the students, this was a huge relief. But for Steven and Roxanne, who had actually taken an interest in the subject, was this really all there was to Pokémon psychology? Flannery let out a long yawn, wiping away the tears that had formed in the corners of her eyes as she complained, "Roxanne, this is the amazing professor you mentioned? Honestly, he seems just like every other teacher, no, worse. He's even better at putting me to sleep." Roxanne closed her notebook and pursed her lips. "You're only seeing the surface." Steven nodded in agreement. "Didn't you notice? Despite how sleepy you felt, not a single person actually fell asleep in class," he pointed out. Back in the consultation room, Johan closed the door behind him and let out a long yawn. He couldn't really blame the students, even as the one teaching the dry, tedious theory. He'd been fighting the urge to doze off himself. He decided to make himself a cup of coffee. Caw. As the grinding of coffee beans filled the room, Gastly floated out from Johan's clothes, its face twisted into a mischievous grin. "Need some help waking up?" Johan glanced at it, unimpressed. "You mean with your hypnosis? You sure that'll wake me up?" Caw. Gastly's face turned pale as it remembered the first time it had used hypnosis on Johan, and the terrifying figure it had encountered in his dreams. It quickly shook its head, laughing sheepishly. Johan chuckled to himself but couldn't help sighing inwardly. It had only been a few days, yet the energy cubes he had bought for Gastly were almost gone, and on top of that, there was the gas bill. It was all adding up, and his funds were running low. With his current salary, it was already becoming difficult to keep up with the costs of raising even just one Gastly. He was seriously considering opening his own psychology clinic outside the school. After all, it wasn't unusual for academy professors to have side businesses. Take Professor Cosmo, for example. Despite his constantly frazzled, disheveled appearance, he actually owned a company. However, setting up a clinic in a city like Rustboro wasn't easy. Finding clients was one thing, but just renting a space would cost a fortune, which gave Johan second thoughts. Knock knock. A staff member from the administration office entered suddenly, placed a piece of paper on Johan's desk, and left without a word. "Professor Johan, here's this semester's teaching schedule." Caw. Gastly immediately floated over with the paper, handing it to Johan. Taking a sip of his hot coffee, Johan scanned the paper quickly. Nothing out of the ordinary. He was about to set it aside when something caught his eye. "Hey? An autumn field trip?" The destination was Mt. Chimney and the hot springs at Lavaridge Town? And it was co-ed? Chapter 18, They Call Me Mewtwo. Rustboro Pokémon Academy, being the largest Pokémon Academy in the Hone region, naturally offered a rich and diverse curriculum. In addition to frequent wilderness expeditions for the battle classes, there were also annual spring and autumn outings. These outings were not only meant to enrich the students' extracurricular activities but also to enhance their practical battle skills. The ongoing debate between the Academy and Traveler styles of Pokémon training was one of the major issues plaguing the Pokémon League. The Academy faction looked down on the Traveler faction, considering them a bunch of reckless brutes. Academy students believed that embarking on a journey with little to no theoretical knowledge was the main reason behind the high death rate among rookie trainers. On the other hand, the Traveler faction held the Academy students in low regard, thinking they were full of book smarts but lacked the practical experience needed to survive. Sure, they could win battles in official matches, but if they encountered danger in the wild, they would be clueless about how to handle it. The Academy's wilderness expeditions and spring/autumn outings were designed to address this gap. Ordinarily, these outings didn't concern Johan all that much. But this time, he found himself on the list of teachers accompanying the autumn outing. More troubling, however, was the fact that he had been assigned to accompany the first-year battle class. Of course, he wasn't the only teacher assigned. The primary responsibility lay with a battle class instructor named Duff, and in addition to Johan, there were 2 other teachers on the trip. The issue, though, lay in who those other 2 teachers were. One was Seiko, a breeder class instructor who Johan got along with fairly well. But the other was Shelley, the oceanic air currents instructor. Though it was still unclear whether Shelley had already joined Team Aqua, or if she had but was simply lying low because of Team Aqua's dormant state, just seeing her name was a constant reminder to Johan Hone would not be peaceful in the future, and neither would the entire Pokémon League. All Johan had ever wanted was to quietly live his life as a teacher, maybe earn a researcher's or professor's title if he got lucky, catch a few more Pokémon, and just be an ordinary trainer. But fate seemed to have other plans. It was one thing if he didn't know what was going to happen. The problem was, he knew all too well. Soon, Hone would be thrown into chaos by Team Aqua and Team Magma. The legendary ancient Pokémon would awaken. When that time came, being just an ordinary person or even a regular trainer would mean his safety would be completely out of his own hands. Sure, Steven would eventually rise to become Hone's champion, protecting the region. But was he really supposed to bet everything on Steven holding off both Kyogre and Groudon for 22 straight days? 22 days. In the long term, there was the impending disaster from Team Aqua and Team Magma. In the short term, the remnants of Greater Movili Holdings wouldn't be sitting quietly either. And even if he wanted to flee to another region, where would he go? Not to mention he would lose his job, but the crises awaiting other regions weren't any less troubling than what was looming over Hone. The bottom line was, if he wanted to protect himself, he needed strength. Sigh. Johan let out a deep sigh. The sense of tension that had momentarily eased after outwitting Doc and the remnants of Greater Movili Holdings returned in full force. Caw. Gastly floated over to Johan, noticing his troubled expression. Isn't an autumn outing supposed to be fun? We get to go to hot springs, so why does he look so worried after seeing that paper? Come on, time for training, Johan said, taking a large gulp of coffee to shake off his unease. Yesterday, your timing with Will-O-Wisp was still off. Caw. Gastly drifted into Johan's coat, surprisingly without any protest against the idea of more training today. In the afternoon, after a simple lunch at the Academy's cafeteria, Johan returned to the consultation room with Gastly, intending to take a nap before starting the afternoon's training session. Pokémon weren't machines or tools. Overtraining could have adverse effects, and Johan was smart enough to know that proper rest was just as important as hard work. Caw. Since Johan needed his computer, Gastly cheekily asked to use his phone instead. It eagerly scrolled through the screen with its tongue, planning to finish watching the adventures of Gengar that it had started earlier. Kalo's photo collection? Nope. Cynthia swimsuit show? Nope. Hey? How did all these strange video recommendations show up after just a few days? What garbage websites? Spit. Meanwhile, Johan leaned his head on one hand while moving the computer mouse with the other, browsing the requirements to become a registered trainer with the Pokémon League. An explosion occurred on an unnamed island in the Kanto region's seas. No casualties reported, and the cause is under investigation. Unova announces plans to build the Royal Unova, set to be the largest luxury cruise liner. After skimming through some news headlines, Johan clicked into the section for trainer qualifications. The Pokémon League's requirements for registration weren't exactly strict. If you had a recommendation from someone with sufficient standing in the league, you could register directly. If you needed an initial Pokémon, you'd have to pay a hefty fee, a route more suited for trainers with some backing. But for those from more ordinary backgrounds, it wasn't as easy. They had to pay a significant fee and pass several difficult assessments, which included a written exam, battle tests, and even a psychological evaluation. The fee alone was steep, and if you failed the assessment, there were no refunds. This system prevented many impulsive would-be trainers from making rash decisions and reduced the workload for the Pokémon Association. Ding! Just as Johan was browsing, his long quiet chat window blinked to life. Opening it, he saw that it was, as he expected, from the user Who Am I? After all this time without any contact, Johan had thought he had successfully brushed off the user during their last conversation. It was surprising to see them online again. This time, though, the first message they sent completely stumped Johan. Who am I? Johan glanced at the username and felt his eye twitch. Shouldn't you be the one to answer that? Before he could type a response, another message popped up. Who am I, really? Was this an existential crisis? Johan paused, his hands hovering over the keyboard. He decided to wait and see. Given the user's current state of mind, it seemed like they would explain further without needing prompting. Sure enough, Johan's patience paid off. Who is it? Why does it keep appearing in my mind? What is the connection between us? It? Johan rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Could this be dissociative identity disorder? His interest was piqued. Pokémon with multiple personalities were exceedingly rare. This would be his first time encountering such a case. After a moment of silence, during which the user didn't send any more messages, Johan finally began typing. First, I need to know what kind of Pokémon you are. Second, if possible, please describe what you see when you think of it. He hit enter and leaned back, his eyes glinting with curiosity. This time, the response took much longer than usual. But Johan wasn't impatient. He waited quietly, giving the other person time. Ding! When the next message finally came, Johan's calm composure shattered. He shot up from his chair with a start, eyes wide. On his screen, a single sentence stared back at him. They call me Mewtwo. SSSSSSS. Chapter 19, Gastly, Gastly. Caca. Gastly was thoroughly enjoying the show on Johan's phone when the sharp screech of a chair sliding across the floor interrupted it. Curiously, Gastly turned to look at Johan. Is he still acting strange? Seeing that Johan wasn't in any immediate danger, Gastly quickly refocused its attention back on the phone. What Gastly didn't know was that Johan had just experienced something truly mind-boggling. As a psychology scholar, Johan prided himself on his mental composure. But when he saw the word Mewtwo pop up in the chat window, he couldn't help but freeze for a moment. Mewtwo. There isn't a single Pokémon fan who doesn't know that name. In his previous life, as Pokémon games developed and introduced regions like Kalos, Alola, Galar, and even Paldea, more and more powerful and terrifying legendary Pokémon emerged. While claiming Mewtwo to be the strongest Pokémon may be a bit presumptive, there's no denying that in the hearts of many die-hard Pokémon fans, Mewtwo occupies a special and crucial place. Unquestionably, Johan was one of those fans. He knew Mewtwo's story well. Mewtwo, the Psychic-type legendary Pokémon, was artificially created by Team Rocket using Mew's genetic material. Mewtwo possesses immense power and destructive capabilities, yet it constantly grapples with its sense of purpose, wondering about the meaning of its existence because it was created, not born. Encountering Mewtwo in a game would surely be an exciting experience for Johan. But meeting Mewtwo in the real world? That's a completely different story. With Mewtwo's abilities, wiping out a person, a Pokémon, or even an entire city would be a trivial task. More importantly, Mewtwo's constant existential crisis makes it a difficult Pokémon to deal with. Mewtwo is a Pokémon that is both confused and stubborn, grappling with its purpose, and when it gets trapped in its mental struggles, there's no stopping it. In terms of psychological issues, if Mewtwo claims second place, there isn't another Pokémon in the world that could claim first. Johan's thoughts quickly shifted to the earlier conversations he had with this user, Who am I? Suddenly, everything started to make sense. Wait a minute. Johan's expression became even more peculiar. Judging by Mewtwo's current state of mind, it was likely recently created. Which means, it had just been manipulated by Giovanni and joined Team Rocket, becoming their tool for capturing wild Pokémon and looting resources. So, when Mewtwo mentioned that person before, it must have been referring to Giovanni. And Johan had suggested that Mewtwo and Giovanni try cooking together. In Johan's mind, the image of Giovanni, the infamous Team Rocket leader, wearing an apron while cooking stirred up an absurd, comical picture. Cough, what a bizarre thought. Who? After taking a deep breath, Johan calmed down and sat back at the computer. Staring at the chat window, Johan felt a slight headache coming on. Sure, now he knew that the other person was Mewtwo and understood its symptoms, but figuring out how to treat Mewtwo was not something any Pokémon psychology expert could easily tackle. But despite the daunting challenge, Johan couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. This kind of case was unique, there would never be another like it in the entire Pokémon world. Johan placed his hands on the keyboard, his mind racing as he typed. So, who do you think you are? He didn't dwell on the name Mewtwo, nor did he express surprise or pay it any attention. As a Pokémon with immense power and a complex psyche, Mewtwo had always been in search of normalcy. It longed to be like other Pokémon, to be a regular Pokémon rather than a one-of-a-kind Mewtwo. It was as if a child born into unimaginable wealth and privilege wanted nothing more than to live as a normal person. Despite being born at a level others could never hope to reach, this child yearned for simplicity. But no matter how hard they tried, they could never truly experience what it meant to be normal. It was a fate sealed from birth. So, ignoring Mewtwo's uniqueness was the first step in communicating with it. Whether in the anime or manga, those who successfully communicated with Mewtwo, whether Ash Ketchum or Red, did so by treating Mewtwo as just another Pokémon first, and as Mewtwo second. That was the key difference between Mewtwo the Pokémon and Mewtwo. I don't know. As expected, Mewtwo didn't display any impatience at Johan's return question. Instead, it responded with confusion. And crucially, Mewtwo was willing to continue the conversation. For example, let's say my name is Gastly, and your name is also Gastly. How would we tell ourselves apart? Mewtwo seemed momentarily lost. There are many Pokémon in the world, even many of the same species. Are there two identical Gastly in the world? I don't think so. Johan smiled and pressed further, so how do we tell apart all the different Gastly? I don't know. Johan continued, what if one Gastly loves to eat noodles, and another Gastly loves to inhale gas? Could you tell the difference then? Yes. This time, Mewtwo answered without hesitation. And how would you tell them apart? They have different preferences. Exactly. Johan's fingers flew across the keyboard like he was writing a well-rehearsed thesis. He posed another question. Now, imagine there are 4 Gastly. 2 of them love noodles, and the other 2 love gas. How would you tell them apart? I don't know. Among the 2 who love noodles, one floats in the air constantly while the other hides in walls. Can you tell the difference now? Yes, because they behave differently. Johan felt a sense of satisfaction. Mewtwo was starting to grasp it. Good, now what have you learned? Preferences, behavior, thoughts, goals. Mewtwo's response surprised Johan. It wasn't just summarizing but also drawing inferences. Johan's excitement grew. Mewtwo was a fast learner. So, back to your original question. You said you don't know who you are. Let me ask you this, if you were facing 2 dying Gastly, one with burn injuries and one starving, and you could only save one with a thought, which would you choose? Mewtwo was silent for a moment. I'm not sure. I don't know how to choose. Now, what if you knew the burned Gastly personally? What would you choose then? I guess I'd choose the burned one. Mewtwo responded hesitantly. Exactly. You are the version of you who would save the burned Gastly. Johan continued with a series of probing questions. If the starving Gastly died, would you regret your decision? Would you feel guilty for indirectly causing the death of the other Gastly? If given another chance, would you still choose the burned one? If the burned Gastly blamed you for not saving its companion, would you get angry? If you had the chance to change your decision, would you? If Johan bombarded Mewtwo with question after question. The other end of the chat was dead silent. But Johan wasn't in a hurry. He wanted to give Mewtwo the time it needed for introspection. After all, this was a journey of self-discovery. Roughly 30 seconds passed before Johan typed out the final message. Ultimately, it doesn't matter how you answer these questions. The moment you begin to answer them, the you who is giving those answers is the real you. It's a you that no other Mewtwo, no matter how many exist, can ever replicate. He hit send. Thud. The computer made a dull sound as the message failed to send. That's when Johan noticed that Mewtwo had gone offline. The system displayed, user is offline. Unable to deliver message. Johan frowned. Achoo. Achoo. Nearby, Gastly started sneezing uncontrollably, splattering saliva all over the screen. Caw. Gastly rubbed its face repeatedly. Am I sick? Or is someone thinking about me? In a nearly sealed underground laboratory in Viridian City. Thud. 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 The alarm lights on the walls flashed frantically, casting the entire lab in an eerie red glow. At the center of the laboratory stood a Pokémon clad in sleek, modern armor. Its eyes were closed, its expression tense, as it stood completely still. From the back of its armor, a network of cables and wires, data cables, power lines, and control lines extended outward. Dozens of researchers in lab coats scurried about like ants in a hot pan, furiously working at computers and control panels. Most of them were in a state of panic. Damn it, what's happening? Did we get hacked? The entire network is down. Hacked? Are you kidding me? Do you think Team Rocket's Porygon firewall is a joke? Porygon firewall? Take a look at Porygon. It's passed out cold. And what the hell does Gastly even mean? Every screen in the lab, from the massive monitors on the walls to the smallest displays, was covered in text repeating the words Gastly. The words were endless, filling every inch of the screen. Gastly. Chapter 20, Robbery. Logged out? Staring at the screen for a long while without receiving a response from Mutwo, Johan gently rubbed his chin in thought. Did I push too hard? Johan was confident that he could help Mutwo understand concepts such as the ID, ego, and superego. Only by gaining a clear understanding of these concepts would Mutwo truly grasp the meaning of I, that it's not just a name or a label. Once Mutwo understood this, it might realize that while it was indeed unique, every Pokémon in the world had its own distinct qualities. The difference lay only in the magnitude of that uniqueness. Being a time traveler with foreknowledge of Mutwo's background, Johan was in a unique position to offer targeted therapy. It was like shooting an arrow and then drawing the target afterward. It was bound to hit the mark one way or another. But with Mutwo logging out so suddenly, Johan felt like he'd thrown a punch only for it to land on soft cotton. Forget it. Johan shook his head after sitting there for a while. Whether Mutwo could accept his guidance or not, he had already done what a Pokémon psychologist should do. And surely, Mutwo, still under Team Rocket's control, wasn't going to track him down via the internet to take revenge, right? Clearing his thoughts and taking a brief break, Johan led a sneeze-filled Gastly to the training hall. What Johan didn't know was that his therapy had caused Team Rocket, the largest underground force in Kanto and Johto, and its notorious, nigh unbreachable network, to crash for an entire day. In Viridian City, within Team Rocket's base. The dim lighting cast eerie shadows throughout the dark hall, barely illuminating the large red R symbol. In the refracted light, a figure could be seen sitting on a chair, stroking the head of a Persian. Beside him stood a woman in a secretary's uniform and glasses, respectfully giving her report. Boss, that's the general situation. Mutwo seemed to have accessed the network without anyone's knowledge, but it appears to have been provoked by something, which triggered an explosion of its psychic powers. As a result, the entire Team Rocket network collapsed, and even Porygon couldn't withstand it. The estimated losses. Provoked. A low, magnetic voice interrupted her. Yes. Based on the data retrieved before the system crash, Mutwo's psychic output reached 3 times its usual levels, with an unknown upper limit. As Giovanni's secretary, Domino, aka Black Tulip, reported the facts clearly. The hand-stroking Persian's back paused. Meow. Persian opened its eyes, puzzled by the sudden stillness. Can we trace who Mutwo contacted? Giovanni resumed stroking Persian, but his tone carried a sharp edge. Domino's expression turned awkward. That might be difficult. Due to Mutwo's power surge, the network is still down, and much of the critical data was overwritten, nearly wiping the database. So, though the Pokémon League couldn't breach Team Rocket's network, Team Rocket also couldn't easily penetrate the League's systems. Wiped. Giovanni raised an eyebrow, surprised. Team Rocket's database could rival the League's, and yet it was full? Domino pursed her lips, her expression turning odd as she replied awkwardly, the entire database was filled with the phrase Gastly. It was as if someone pulled back the covers at night only to find nothing but Gastlys beneath. Giovanni remained silent for a long time before uttering a single word. Investigate. Yes, sir. Achoo. Back in the training room, Gastly suddenly halted mid-training, letting out a loud sneeze. Immediately, a thick, dark purple gas erupted from its body, drifting toward Johan. Johan's expression tensed as he hurriedly dodged to the side. It was the poison-type move, Smog. After narrowly avoiding the attack, Johan took a deep breath. Every training session with Gastly seemed to come with its fair share of accidents. As a result, not only did Gastly need training, but Johan also found himself honing his reflexes. Lately, his dodging skills had become noticeably sharper. Caca. I didn't mean to. Gastly looked at Johan with wide, guilty eyes. If you had hidden that oops expression a little better, I might have believed you, Johan said with an exasperated sigh as he dusted off his clothes. Caca. Gastly sighed internally. Being the Pokémon of a psychology expert was tough. Nothing escaped Johan's eyes. But Gastly truly hadn't meant it. It was just confused about why it had been sneezing so much today. Alright, it looks like you're not in the best shape today. We'll stop for now. Training should be done in moderation. Johan pulled out a shimmering purple energy cube. Caca. Upon seeing the energy cube, Gastly instantly forgot all its troubles, devouring it with delight and showing a satisfied grin. With training done, Johan decided to leave work early. After all, the academy didn't strictly monitor when teachers clocked in or out. He'd heard that Professor Cosmo next door disappeared for 2 or 3 days at a time, and no one bothered him. In fact, many teachers at the academy took on side jobs to earn extra income. For example, some of the battle instructors worked as coaches at battle clubs, where they earned far more than their teaching salaries. However, instead of heading straight home, Johan took Gastly to the center of Rustboro City. They were almost out of energy cubes, and it was time to stock up. Plus, they needed more groceries for the house, so Johan decided to do a bulk shopping trip. Taking Gastly out shopping wasn't an easy task. Having slept for nearly 1,000 years, everything in Gastly's eyes was new and fascinating. Whether it was poking around here or investigating there, Gastly could cause damage Johan couldn't afford to pay for. Calming down the lively Gastly wasn't easy either. In the end, Johan had to pay a hefty price of 3 energy cubes just to get through a relatively peaceful shopping trip. And the constant caw-caw-caw-caw ringing in his ears wasn't exactly helping either. Still, things went relatively smoothly. When Johan finally left the energy cube shop, his wallet significantly lighter, he at least had enough food to keep Gastly fed for 2 weeks. Though, in all honesty, Johan doubted it would last the full 2 weeks. Last time, he had calculated the amount of cubes needed for 2 weeks, but Gastly devoured it all in just one. Gastly's appetite was far larger than he had anticipated. Even with the increased supply, Johan wasn't sure how long it would last. Johan sighed heavily outside the shop. I really need to find a way to make more money. Ah! Suddenly, a sharp scream echoed through the street, drawing the attention of passers-by. A masked man darted toward a woman, snatching her purse in one swift motion. He quickly jumped onto a waiting motorcycle, preparing to speed away with his accomplice. Many onlookers, startled by the commotion, prepared to intervene, but it was clear the robbers had planned their escape meticulously and wouldn't be easily stopped. At that moment, a voice sounded as if spoken right into Johan's ear. Metagross, use psychic. A familiar figure appeared in Johan's line of sight. And that figure seemed to notice him as well. Steven. Johan-sensei.
Thanks for listening.